"Daddy, please stop them." Single dad janitor took down 3 men. Next morning, a motorcade appeared. It wasn't supposed to be anyone. For 7 years, Logan Hayes mopped floors, fixed broken light fixtures, and clocked out before sunrise. A quiet man with a quiet daughter and a life small enough to disappear inside. Nobody at Blackstone Global gave him a second look. Janitors never get second looks. Then 3 armed men grabbed his 7-year-old girl in the middle of a billion-dollar lobby. And in 6 seconds, all 3 were on the ground, unconscious, bleeding, done. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody could explain it. And by the time the security footage hit the wrong desk, Logan Hayes was already gone, mop in hand, head down, heart hammering, pretending to be nobody again. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end because it only gets more intense from here. Tap the like button if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The overnight shift at Blackstone Global started at 11 p.m. and ended at 6:30 in the morning, and in 7 years, Logan Hayes had never been late. Not once. He had a system. He always had a system. It was one of the things left over from a life he no longer talked about, a life he barely let himself remember. He'd wake at 9 p.m., make Emma dinner before she went to bed, sit on the edge of her mattress until she fell asleep, then change into his gray uniform, lace his boots with the same 2-loop knot he'd been tying since he was 22, and walk the 11 blocks to the Blackstone Tower with his head down and his hands in his pockets. He liked the walk. He liked the silence of a city pretending to sleep. He didn't own a car, didn't need one. Everything that mattered to him fit inside a 2-bedroom apartment on Carver Street, a second-hand couch, a kitchen table with one wobbly leg he kept meaning to fix, a shelf of picture books Emma had mostly outgrown, and the framed photograph on the bedroom wall. Rachel, her hair still wet from the ocean, laughing at something he'd said. She'd been 29 in that photo. She never got to 30. Emma had her mother's laugh. Logan noticed it every single day, and it was the best and worst thing about his life simultaneously. He'd named his daughter Emma because Rachel had wanted that name for a girl. He'd never told Emma that. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because some things were too heavy to hand to a 7-year-old. Maybe because he was still figuring out how to carry them himself. The tower was 42 floors of glass and steel in the middle of downtown, the kind of building that made regular people feel smaller just by existing near it. Blackstone Global occupied all 42 floors. The lobby alone was larger than Logan's entire apartment block. White marble floors, recessed lighting, 3 security desks staffed around the clock, and a wall of elevators behind a set of frosted glass panels that required a keycard scan to access after hours. Logan had a keycard. He had a cart. He had a playlist of country music he listened to through one earbud, the right one, never the left, while he worked. The other janitors called him Quiet Logan, which was accurate. He didn't socialize much. Not because he was unfriendly exactly, but because small talk required a certain kind of energy he'd never quite had. And because conversation had a way of drifting toward personal territory, and personal territory was somewhere Logan Hayes did not go. "You got kids?" someone would ask. "A daughter, 7. "Cute age. What's her name?" "Emma." "And the mom?" And there it was. The question he always hit like a wall. He'd learned to say she passed in a tone that closed the door gently but firmly, and most people, to their credit, didn't push further. People understood grief as a no trespassing sign even when they didn't understand the grief itself. He'd been a janitor here for 3 years. Before Blackstone, he'd worked a warehouse loading dock in another city. Before that, a school cafeteria. Before that, a period of time he didn't think about at all. He and Emma had moved 4 times in 7 years. Each city slightly smaller than the last, each apartment slightly cheaper, each life slightly quieter. Quiet was the goal. Quiet was the strategy. Quiet kept Emma safe. The night it happened was a Thursday. Logan was on the lobby level working the floor buffer along the east corridor, a long, straight stretch of marble that ran parallel to the main security desk. It was midnight. The building was mostly empty. The overnight security guard, a heavy-set man named Garrett, who wore his uniform shirt untucked and spent most of his shift watching college basketball on his phone, was at his post behind the desk. Emma was with him tonight. That was the arrangement on Thursdays, when the after-school program ran late, and the evening sitter had her ceramics class. Logan would bring Emma to the building, sign her in as family. Garrett had long since stopped pretending to care about the protocol. And she'd sit in the small break room near the maintenance corridor with her backpack, her juice box, and her library book, until Logan's shift ended and they walked home together in the early morning dark. Emma liked it, actually. She called it their secret adventure. She'd sit at the little break room table with the fluorescent light that buzzed slightly and the vending machine that dispensed crackers 3 for $1, doing her homework and drawing in her sketchbook until her eyes got heavy, and she'd curl up on her folded-up jacket on the floor and sleep until Logan came to get her. She was good at sleeping anywhere. She got that from him. Logan was about 40 feet into the east corridor, the buffer humming beneath his hands, when he heard the lobby doors open. He didn't look up immediately. Doors opened. That was normal. The building had security, but it wasn't a fortress. Couriers came and went, cleaners from other floors. Sometimes used the main entrance when the service elevator was occupied. Delivery drivers buzzed in with late packages for executives who apparently never slept. But something made him look up. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was more like the absence of a sound. 3 men entering a lobby don't make as little noise as these 3 made. They came through the front doors spaced apart in a configuration that wasn't conscious but was. A covering pattern, left, center, right, the kind of spread that gave each man a clear line of sight on the other's flanks without any of them having to think about it. Trained. Logan's hands didn't stop moving the buffer. His face didn't change. But something in his chest went completely, absolutely still. The way a city goes still in the seconds before a storm arrives, and the birds stop, and the air pressure drops, and every animal alive suddenly knows. The 3 men wore civilian clothes. Dark jackets, dark pants, nothing that would read as unusual on a security camera doing a casual sweep. But one of them had his hands positioned with his thumbs out from his hips, which meant he was used to carrying something there and was trying to look like he wasn't. Another had a wireless earpiece he'd tried to hide behind his collar, but hadn't quite managed. The third scanned the lobby in a slow, practiced arc. Not the gawking of someone unfamiliar with the building, but the methodical check of someone running a target confirmation. They weren't here to drop off a package. Garrett looked up from his phone and started to say something. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" And the first man said something back that Logan couldn't hear from 40 feet away over the buffer's hum. Garrett nodded and pointed toward the elevator bank, which meant they'd given him a cover story and it had landed. The guard went back to his phone. Logan watched the 3 men split. 2 moved toward the elevators. 1 turned and walked toward the maintenance corridor, toward the break room. Logan left the buffer running. He walked back toward the corridor entrance at his normal pace, the slightly tired shuffle of a man who'd been on his feet for 2 hours and had 4 more to go. He pulled out his phone like he was checking a message. He turned into the corridor. The man was 12 feet ahead of him, hand already on the break room door. Logan said, "Hey." The man turned. He was big. Not as big as Logan, but big enough. He had the kind of face that had absorbed a lot of damage over the years and hadn't learned anything from it. His eyes did a quick assessment of Logan's gray janitor uniform and dismissed him in under a second. "Wrong floor, pal," the man said. "Take a walk." "That's our break room," Logan said. His voice was flat. "My daughter's in there." Something shifted in the man's expression. Not guilt. Nothing so human as that. More like recalibration. Like he'd just been given information that changed the operational math. He reached for the door. Logan moved. What happened in the next 6 seconds would be replayed on the Blackstone security system 47 times over the following 3 days by people who had trouble believing what they were watching even on the 10th viewing. A janitor with gray at his temples and a mop callus on his right palm crossed 12 feet of corridor in a motion that was not running exactly, but was faster than running should have looked, caught the larger man's extended arm at the wrist and elbow, simultaneously redirected the momentum into the wall with a controlled rotation that produced a single sharp sound, impact, not crack, and lowered him to the ground before the man's legs had fully registered what happened to them. Quiet. Efficient. The man was unconscious before he understood he was in a fight. Logan was already moving toward the lobby. The 2 at the elevator bank heard nothing. That was intentional. Logan came at them from the edge of the frosted glass partition, and by the time the nearer one registered the peripheral motion, Logan had already committed to the angle. A short driving strike to the throat that didn't kill but absolutely ended the fight, and a follow-through pivot that caught the third man mid-reach for something beneath his jacket. Logan got to the hand before the hand got to whatever it was going for. There was a brief, ugly scramble. The third man was faster than he looked and managed to clip Logan hard across the jaw before Logan got proper leverage. And then it was over. All three down. 6 seconds, maybe 7. Logan stood in the empty lobby breathing harder than he wanted to. His jaw throbbed. He touched it briefly with 2 fingers, assessed, moved on. Garrett was standing behind his desk with his phone in one hand and his mouth open. "Call 911, Logan said. "Right now." What just... "Call 911, Garrett." He walked back to the maintenance corridor without waiting for an answer. Emma was still asleep on her folded jacket, her sketchbook open on the floor beside her, a half-finished drawing of a horse she'd been working on for 2 weeks. She was curled on her side with one arm tucked under her cheek, her dark hair covering half her face. Her breathing was slow and even. Logan stood in the doorway for a moment. His hands were shaking slightly. The adrenaline metabolism, the body processing what the mind had already handled. He pressed them flat against his thighs until they stopped. He went back to the lobby. He checked all 3 men, zip-tied their wrists with cable ties from his cart, checked them for additional weapons, found 2 firearms and 1 ceramic blade, bagged them with a trash liner and set them near the security desk. Then he called Garrett's desk phone because the man had apparently entered a mild state of shock and needed something concrete to focus on. "The police will be here in a few minutes," Logan said. "Tell them 3 intruders entered the building. I subdued them. They're secured near the elevator bank. Give them my name." "Logan," Garrett said. "What are you?" It wasn't really a question. Logan didn't answer it. He went back to his buffer and finished the east corridor. Up. The police arrived in 9 minutes. 2 patrol units, then a third. Detectives came 40 minutes after that. By 2 a.m., there were 6 law enforcement personnel in the lobby and a supervising detective named Reyes, who kept looking at Logan with an expression that sat somewhere between professional suspicion and frank bewilderment. 3 men, Reyes said. "Armed." "Yes." "And you took them down in," she glanced at her notes, "approximately 6 seconds, according to your coworker. Give or take. With no weapon. I had a mop handle nearby, didn't end up needing it." Reyes wrote something. "Military background?" Logan looked at her calmly. "Some. Long time ago." "What branch?" "Navy." He paused. "Administrative." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "We're going to need your full statement, Mr. Hayes," she said finally, "and we'll want to speak with your daughter." "She's asleep," Logan said. "She doesn't know anything happened. I'd like to keep it that way." "She may have seen something." "She didn't." His voice stayed level, but something in it shifted slightly, just enough. "She slept through the whole thing. Please." Reyes held his gaze for another second, then nodded. "We'll be in touch." By 5 a.m., the lobby had been cleared. The 3 men had been transported, 2 to a hospital for observation, all 3 eventually to a holding facility. They weren't talking. The ceramic knife and the 2 firearms were being processed. Garrett had given his statement 3 times and was now sitting in the break room eating crackers from the vending machine and staring at nothing. Logan woke Emma at 6. She came awake the way she always did, gradually, blinking, reaching for him automatically the way she had since she was an infant. He helped her up and straightened her jacket and handed her her backpack. "Did I miss anything?" she asked, voice still blurry with sleep. "Nope," Logan said. "Quiet night." They walked home through the early morning streets, Emma holding his hand, her sneakers scuffing the sidewalk. The sun was just starting to push color into the sky. That first gray-pink light that didn't commit to anything yet. Logan's jaw still ached where the third man had caught him. He'd deal with it later. "Dad?" Emma said. "Yeah." "There's going to be pancakes at school today, the kind with the blueberries." "Yeah?" "Do you think Mrs. Carver makes them with real blueberries or the fake frozen kind?" "Probably the frozen kind." "I still like them, though." "I know you do." She swung his hand once, twice. The city was just beginning to wake up around them. A delivery truck rumbling past, a coffee shop rolling up its security gate, a dog walker with 4 leashes, and a coffee cup somehow managing both. Logan watched all of it and saw none of it because he was listening, the way he always listened, the way some part of him never stopped listening, to every sound and every gap between sounds and every shadow that moved a half-second wrong. Nothing. The morning was clean, but he knew better than to trust that. He thought about the three men, the way they'd moved, the spacing, the earpiece, the ceramic blade. Amateur hour, those three were not. They'd come in with a plan and a target and gear that cost real money. Someone had paid for them. Someone had sent them. Someone knew where Emma was on Thursday nights. He thought about that the rest of the walk home. He held Emma's hand and smiled at what she said and let her tell him about blueberry pancakes. And underneath that, very quietly, very calmly, he began to think through what needed to happen next. He was still thinking about it when he tucked her back into bed for 2 more hours before school. He sat on the edge of her mattress in the gray morning light, watching her breathe, his hands resting on his knees, his jaw throbbing, the fading sound of the city filtering through the window he'd cracked open because she liked the air. 7 years of quiet, 7 years of careful, 7 years of no one knowing his name. Something had just changed. He just didn't know yet how much. 14 floors above the lobby where 3 men were still being processed, a security system logged 1. Final anomalous event at 6:14 a.m. An automated upload completed to an external server. 41 minutes of lobby footage, time-stamped, high resolution. The upload destination was registered to a private account belonging to one Victoria Sinclair. She would see the footage by 7 a.m., and by 8 she would have her people running Logan Hayes through every database they had access to, which was, given her resources, essentially all of them. They would find almost nothing, and that would tell her more than everything. Victoria Sinclair watched the footage 4 times before she said a single word. Her assistant, a thin, precise man named Daniel, who had worked for her for 6 years and prided himself on anticipating her reactions, had no framework for what he was watching over her shoulder. He'd seen the alert come in at 6:47 a.m. The automated security flag, 3 intruders subdued in the main lobby, police response, all personnel accounted for. And he'd pulled the footage expecting to see a scuffle, maybe a lucky punch, some embarrassing corporate security breakdown he'd have to spin for the board. What he watched instead made him feel like the floor had shifted slightly beneath his feet. Victoria said nothing. She rewound it to the moment the janitor crossed the corridor. Watched it again. "Who is he?" she said. It wasn't a question so much as a statement directed at whoever in the room was capable of answering it. Daniel cleared his throat. "His name is Logan Hayes. He's been on the overnight cleaning crew for," he checked his tablet, 3 years and 2 months. "Hired through the Meridian Staffing Agency. Clean background check at time of hire. No flags. No incidents. Pull everything we have on him." "I already started." He hesitated. There's not much. The background check from the agency shows a social security number, a prior address in Raleigh, North Carolina, and 2 previous employment references. Both references check out superficially. His tax records exist, but they're thin. No military service record that we can locate publicly. He paused. No online presence at all. No social media, no property records, he's very difficult to find. Victoria was still looking at the frozen image on her screen. Logan Hayes standing in the lobby, 3 men down around him, his posture completely relaxed, like a man who'd just finished something routine. "That's not a janitor," she said. "No," Daniel agreed. "It isn't." She stood up from her desk. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on at midnight, which meant she hadn't slept, which was not unusual for her during weeks like this. The office on the 38th floor was bright and spare. Glass desk, clean surfaces, a single framed architectural print on the wall that she'd inherited from the previous occupant and never gotten around to removing. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was fully awake now, traffic building, the sun climbing above the towers. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Went home at the end of his shift. He lives on Carver Street with his daughter. She's 7. Victoria turned from the window. "His daughter was in the building last night." "In the break room, yes. She apparently sleeps there on Thursday shifts when he can't get a sitter." Something crossed Victoria's face that wasn't quite an expression, more like the shadow of one. She sat back down. "I want him in this office," she said, "this morning, and I want Marcus in here too, before 9. Marcus Webb was Victoria's head of corporate security, a former federal agent who was good at his job and knew it in a way that sometimes made him difficult to be around. He arrived at 8:15, coffee in hand, and watched the footage without speaking. When it ended, he watched it again. Then he set his coffee down. "Whoever trained that man," he said, "didn't do it in a weekend course." No. The way he took the approach angle on the first target, that's not street instinct. That's something somebody drilled into him until it became muscle memory. He leaned closer to the screen. Look at his hands after. No shaking. Heart rate probably spiked and then came right back down. That's a man who's done this before and done it a lot. Can you find out who he is? Really is? Marcus straightened up. He had the look of a man doing quick math on something unpleasant. I can try, but if his record is clean the way Daniel says, if someone sanitized it, that means somebody with real reach helped him disappear. You don't scrub a background that clean without resources. So either he did it himself, Victoria said, or someone did it for him. Either way, it means he's not who he says he is. Marcus picked his coffee back up. Which makes him a problem, Victoria, or an asset, depending on what he wants. He wants to be left alone, she said, almost to herself. That's what he wants. 7 years of quiet, a clean apartment, and a daughter who likes blueberry pancakes. She paused. Find out what I'm missing. I want the real story by end of day. Logan was in the kitchen making oatmeal when someone knocked on his apartment door at 8:40 a.m. Emma had left for school 40 minutes ago. He'd walked her to the corner and watched until the crossing guard had her on the other side of the street, and she'd turned once to wave at him, her whole arm moving in that exuberant kid wave that used both elbows. And then he'd come home and changed out of his uniform and was considering whether to sleep or eat first when the knock came. 3 knocks. Measured. The knock of someone who expected the door to open. Logan set down his spoon. He crossed to the door without hurrying and looked through the peephole. A man in a dark suit, mid-40s, good posture, face neutral. Behind him in the narrow hallway, partially visible, a second man. He opened the door. "Mr. Hayes," the first man said. "My name is Daniel Cho. I'm personal assistant to Victoria Sinclair. She'd like to speak with you this morning, if you're available." "I'm not," Logan said. Daniel blinked. He'd clearly anticipated a range of responses. That wasn't one of them. "Sir, Ms. Sinclair is... I know who she is. She owns the building I clean. Tell her I appreciate the invitation, and I'll see her at my next shift." He started to close the door. Daniel put a hand out, not blocking it, just making his presence felt. "Mr. Hayes, 3 men came into that building last night specifically looking for her. We believe the threat against Ms. Sinclair is ongoing and has been for some time. Last night wasn't the first incident." He paused. "She thinks you might be able to help." Logan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked past him at the second man, who hadn't moved or spoken, and whose hands were visible and empty, and whose entire posture communicated a very specific kind of professional patience. "Give me 10 minutes, Logan said. Victoria Sinclair in person was different from Victoria Sinclair in the business press photographs, which Logan had never seen but could have predicted. The photographs, he imagined, would show a confident young billionaire in controlled environments, sleek, composed, every element of the frame working for her. In person, she was 30 years old and tired in a way that didn't fully show until you were in the same room with her, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She'd partially addressed with something from a compact that hadn't fully worked, and she looked at him from across her glass desk with an intelligence that was immediately apparent and immediately assessing. She looked at his jaw first. The bruising had come up properly overnight, a mottled purple-yellow patch along the left side that he hadn't been able to completely cover. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine." "You took a hit." He was fast. It happens. He sat down in the chair across from her without being invited to. "You wanted to talk." She held his gaze. "I've had my people running your name since 6 this morning." "Okay." "They found almost nothing." "I live quietly." "Nobody lives that quietly, Mr. Hayes. Not without help." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to expose you or threaten you or make your life difficult. I'm here because last night 3 professional operatives walked into my building and went directly for my building's break room. And the only reason nothing happened to your daughter was because you were 40 feet away and apparently capable of things that would surprise most Navy SEALs." She stopped. "Did I say something wrong?" He'd kept his face still. He was good at that. But she'd noticed something. A shift in his breathing, maybe? Or the fraction of a second's pause before he answered. You said Navy SEALs, he said. That's a specific reference. Marcus Webb, my head of security, said whoever trained you drilled it in deep. He's ex-federal. He knows what he's looking at. She paused again. I'm not going to press you on your history. I mean that. But I need you to understand what I'm going to tell you because it affects your daughter's safety as much as mine. Something in her voice changed on those last 3 words. Not dramatically. She wasn't performing. It was the opposite of performing. It was the sound of someone saying something true that cost them something to say. Logan sat back. I'm listening. She started 7 months ago, which was when she'd first noticed the patterns. Anomalies in her personal schedule appearing in places they shouldn't. A competitor making a move 2 days before an internal meeting that hadn't been logged anywhere public. A courier arriving at her private residence before she'd confirmed the address with the sender. A car that appeared 3 times in different locations on 3 consecutive days. Small things. Individually deniable. Collectively undeniable. She'd brought it to Marcus. Marcus had quietly opened an internal investigation. 2 weeks in, he'd found a leak. Not a file, not a server breach, but a person. A junior executive named Carter Wells in the analytics division who had been feeding information to an outside party for at least 4 months. When they'd traced the money, it went through 3 shell companies and stopped. We handed it to the FBI, Victoria said. They took the case, thanked us, and went quiet. I haven't heard back in 3 months. And Wells? Still employed here. At Logan's expression, she raised a hand. I know, Marcus argued the same thing you're thinking right now, but the FBI asked us to leave him in place. They want to trace the pipeline. If we terminate him, whoever's running him just finds another entry point and we lose the thread entirely. She rubbed the side of her neck. So I've had to go to work every day for 3 months, knowing one of my executives is feeding my movements to people I can't identify. That's a hard position to be in, Logan said. He said it plainly, not as condolence. It gets harder. She reached into a drawer and slid a thin folder across the desk. He opened it. Inside were photographs. His apartment building, the exterior. Emma's school, 2 angles. Emma herself, on the sidewalk outside the school entrance, in what appeared to be a long-lens photograph taken from a vehicle. His hands did not move. His face did not move. But something in him went very, very cold. Those were uploaded to a server we've been monitoring, Victoria said, 3 days ago. We don't know yet if the men last night knew Emma was in the building specifically, or if they saw an opportunity when they confirmed she was there. But someone has been watching your daughter. She waited. He closed the folder, set it back on the desk, looked at her. Why are you telling me this, he said. Because you deserve to know. She held his gaze. And because I think you're the only person in a 10-mile radius who can actually help me figure out what's happening before someone gets killed. I'm a janitor, he said. You're really not, she said, and we both know it. The silence between them lasted a full 5 seconds. Outside the window, the city hummed and moved and didn't care. What is it you think you need? Logan said finally. I need someone I can trust, who isn't already inside this building's social structure, which appears to be compromised. Someone who can look at what Marcus has assembled and tell me if we're missing something. She paused. And someone who, if it comes to it, can protect my daughter. She caught herself. Emma, if it comes to it. The slip was small, but Logan caught it. He filed it and said nothing. I'm not an investigator, he said, or a bodyguard. I know what you are, she said quietly. I don't know the specifics, but I know what I watched on that security footage and I know what it means. And right now I have enemies I can't see. And an FBI investigation that's gone silent and a mole I have to pretend not to know about. Her voice was steady, but her hands on the desk weren't quite. The left one had pressed flat, knuckles slightly pale. I'm asking for help. I'm not good at asking for help. I'm telling you that so you understand I mean it. Logan looked at her hands, then at her face. Emma gets protection first, he said. Whatever else happens, that's non-negotiable. Agreed. And I'm not officially anything. I'm not on your payroll. I'm not on paper anywhere. I don't attend meetings, and I don't sit in conference rooms. Fine. And if at any point I decide this is more than I can manage without compromising Emma's safety, I walk. No argument. Understood. He stood up. Show me what Marcus has. Well, Marcus Webb did not warm to Logan Hayes immediately, which was understandable and which Logan didn't take personally. Webb was a man who'd spent 20 years building a professional reputation and a security apparatus he was proud of, and now a janitor with a bruised jaw was sitting across from him at a conference table looking at his files with an expression that was unreadable in a way Webb found irritating. The materials were substantial. 7 months of incident logs, surveillance photographs, financial trace documents, personnel files on the suspected mole, and 3 others flagged as possible secondary contacts. A timeline of anomalies mapped against Victoria's public schedule. 3 prior incidents, a staged vehicle collision near Victoria's residence that could have been an accident but wasn't, a catering crew at a private company event that included 2 individuals with no verifiable employment history, and a hotel suite booking in Victoria's name for a conference she hadn't attended and hadn't made. Logan went through the materials methodically and quietly for 40 minutes. He didn't take notes. Webb watched him and tried not to show that he was watching him. Finally, Logan looked up. "The hotel booking," he said. "How was it discovered?" Hotel manager flagged it when the suite showed up on the corporate card. Victoria's PA, Daniel, caught it during routine statement review. And the reservation? Who made it? It was called in by phone, number traced to a prepaid. What day was it made? Webb checked. October 14th. What was happening in Victoria's schedule on October 14th? Webb frowned and flipped back through the calendar file. He found it, and his expression shifted. Board meeting. Ran long. She was in this building all day and most of the evening. Whoever made that reservation knew she wouldn't be at the hotel, Logan said. They weren't booking it for her. They were using her name to establish a pattern, something they could pull out later to suggest erratic behavior, discredit her if they needed to. He looked at Webb. This isn't about money. Whoever's behind this isn't trying to rob her company or steal a contract. They're building a case file, preparing a long play. Webb was quiet for a moment. That's consistent with what the FBI said before they went quiet. What exactly did they say? That the organization behind it showed signs of being, he chose the word carefully, patient, disciplined, like they've been building something for a long time and they're not in a hurry. Logan nodded slowly. Something moved behind his eyes. Not recognition exactly, but the ghost of it. You disagree? Webb said. No, I think you're right. He tapped the edge of the folder. But patient organizations don't send 3 men into a lobby in the middle of the night to grab a child. That's not disciplined. That's emotional. He paused. Someone changed the plan. Or the plan got changed for them. Emma came home from school at 3:15, and Logan was at the corner waiting for her. She came off the bus with her backpack bouncing and a drawing in her hand. She was always carrying a drawing somewhere. And she launched into a full account of the blueberry pancakes before she'd fully reached him, which meant they were real blueberries, which mattered enormously to her in a way that made his chest ache with how specific and complete her small joys were. He held her hand on the way home and said the right things at the right moments and let her talk. And underneath that, he was scanning the street, the parked cars, the windows above the drugstore, the van he'd clocked twice in the last 40 minutes on different blocks. Same van. Blue. No plates visible from this angle. He didn't change pace. He didn't look directly. He turned them left at the corner instead of right, a block-long detour, and watched the van in his peripheral vision. It stayed parked. Could be nothing. Could be a plumber. Could be someone waiting to pick up a kid from the adjacent school. Could be the same network that sent 3 men with a ceramic blade into a corporate lobby at midnight. He got Emma upstairs, fed her a snack, sat with her while she did her homework. She was working on subtraction, the carrying the one kind, which she found philosophically frustrating in a way she couldn't articulate, but which came out as a general grievance against the number 7. Why does 7 always have to give 1 away? She said. Math is not fair, Logan agreed. You should tell my teacher that. I'll put it on my list. She looked at him over her paper. She was perceptive in the unpredictable way that kids sometimes are, picking up on things adults thought they'd hidden, missing things adults thought were obvious. She studied his face. You have a bruise, she said. I walked into something at work. Does it hurt? Not really. She looked at him for another second, then went back to her subtraction. He was fairly certain she didn't entirely believe him, but she let it go, which was its own kind of grace. After she was asleep that night, Logan sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down everything he remembered from the files Marcus had shown him. Not everything Marcus had shown him, specific things, dates, names, the financial trace endpoints. The description of the anomalies and the way they clustered around Victoria's personal movements rather than her company's public activities. He wrote it out, and then he sat and looked at it and thought about what he'd said to Marcus about emotional decisions inside patient organizations, about someone changing the plan, a patient organization that had been building something for a very long time, that had targeted a woman in a very specific way, that had, at some point in the last 72 hours, decided to accelerate. He thought about why an organization like that would suddenly accelerate. What had changed? What pressure had come from somewhere to push a deliberate, methodical network into sending 3 men to grab a 7-year-old from a janitor's break room? He didn't have an answer, not yet. But he'd noticed something in Marcus's files, a small thing, the kind of thing that's easy to overlook when you're building a case file from inside and you're too close to your own material. A name that appeared once, in a financial document footnote, attached to one of the shell companies in the money trace. Not a prominent name. A middle name in a list of 3 for a numbered LLC registered in Delaware 3 years ago. He'd written it down before he'd fully registered why. He looked at it now. Cross D. He didn't know that name, but it had snagged something, some old thread in some old part of him that he'd spent 7 years trying to let go quiet. He sat with it for a while. Outside, the blue van was gone from the street. That didn't make him feel better. The name Cross D sat on Logan's notepad for 2 days before he did anything about it. That wasn't hesitation exactly. It was the kind of deliberate stillness he'd learned a long time ago. The discipline of not moving until you understood what you were moving toward. Rushing at a thread before you knew where it led was how operations unraveled. He'd seen it happen to better men than him, men who'd survived a dozen impossible situations and then gotten killed because they got impatient at the wrong moment. So he waited. He watched. He walked Emma to school and picked her up and made dinner and sat with her while she drew horses at the kitchen table. And the whole time, the quiet, methodical part of his brain that he'd never fully been able to shut off was working the problem from every angle he could find. On the second day, he called a number he hadn't dialed in 4 years. It rang 6 times before anyone picked up. When they did, there was silence on the line. Not dead silence, but the particular quality of someone choosing not to speak first. "It's Hayes," Logan said. A pause. Then, "I figured you were dead." "Not yet." I was standing at the kitchen window watching the street below. "I need to run a name." "Logan." The voice on the other end, but a man named Tate, who had no last name Logan had ever been able to confirm, and who operated in the complicated space between intelligence contractor and legally ambiguous asset, sounded cautious in a way he usually didn't. "You've been gone a long time. Some people were happy about that." "The name is Cross. First initial D. Connected to a Delaware LLC registered 3 years ago. Shell company in a financial trace that touches organized criminal activity in the Northeast." He paused. "It rang a bell I can't place." Another silence, longer this time. "Where'd you pull this?" Tate said. "Does it matter?" "It might." Something shifted in his tone. "Damian Cross. You really don't remember the name?" Logan was quiet. "Operation Clearwater," Tate said. 2004. And there it was. Not a flood. More like a door opening onto a room he'd sealed shut and hadn't entered in 20 years, and the light coming through wasn't clean. It was the kind of light that showed you everything you'd put in there and why you'd put it away. "The senator's daughter," Logan said, among other things. He'd been 22 years old and 4 years into his SEAL career when Operation Clearwater happened, young enough to believe that what they did existed cleanly on one side of a line and everything else existed on the other. He'd learned better since, but in 2004 he'd believed it, and so when the mission came down, a hostage extraction in a coastal compound, a 14-year-old girl taken by an armed criminal network as leverage against her father's Senate vote on a defense appropriations bill, he'd understood it exactly as presented. Go in, get the girl, come home. They'd gone in at 0-200, 6 men. Logan had been third in the breach. The compound had been more fortified than the intelligence suggested, which was always the problem with intelligence. and they'd taken contact at the outer perimeter, and what was supposed to be a clean extraction had become a 20-minute running fight through a building that was actively trying to kill them. He'd found the girl in a locked room on the 3rd floor. She'd been tied to a chair and her face was a mess. Someone had hit her, more than once. And when he'd come through the door, she'd made a sound he still heard sometimes. That specific pitch of a child who had convinced herself no one was coming, and then someone did. He'd cut the restraints and covered her with his body, and they'd extracted under fire. 2 members of his team were wounded, 1 seriously. The network's compound was destroyed in the follow-up action. The girl went home to her father, the network's financier, the man who'd organized and funded the operation, who'd been running similar leverage schemes across 3 countries, and whose name Logan had not known at the time, had escaped. He'd been in the compound but not in the building, and by the time the action was over and the debrief happened, he was gone. Logan had never known the man's name. He'd been a ghost in an intelligence file, a budget line, and a strategic function, not a face. His name was Damien Cross. He rebuilt, Tate said. Lost everything in the Clearwater fallout, assets, personnel, infrastructure. It took him years. But he's patient, Cross. That's always been his thing. He doesn't move until he's ready. 20 years to get ready, Logan said. He's been looking for the operator who led that extraction since 2005. You covered your tracks well when you left the service, but nobody's invisible forever. If he found the girl, Tate stopped. He found the girl, Logan said. It wasn't a question. Victoria Sinclair, born Victoria Hale, legally changed when she was adopted at 16 by Thomas Sinclair, the investment banker. Her father, the senator, died in a car accident in 2009. She built the company from the inheritance, public profile, very visible. A pause. She's not hard to find, Logan. She runs a billion-dollar company. She's in the business press every other week. And he used her to find me. He's been watching her for at least 2 years, based on what's circulating in certain channels. Waiting for you to make contact. When you didn't, he escalated. Figured forcing a crisis would bring you out of the woodwork. Tate paused again. Did it work? Logan didn't answer that directly. What's his current operational capacity? Significant. He spent 2 decades building an organization that doesn't look like an organization. Private security contracting on the surface. Underneath, he runs intelligence collection, hired enforcement, high-level leverage operations. The FBI has a file on him that's been active for 9 years and hasn't produced an indictment. He's got good lawyers, good cover, and very good help. Tate's voice dropped slightly. He's not sending thugs at you, Logan. Not his top tier. What happened in the lobby? Those were scouts. I was confirming you were there. And now he knows. Now he knows. Logan watched a woman walk a dog past his building entrance below. Normal morning. Nothing wrong with the street that he could see. He'd checked 4 times since waking up. I need everything you can pull on him, Logan said. Current operational structure, known personnel, any surveillance assets he's running in this city, and I need it fast. That's going to cost you a conversation you don't want to have. I know. There are people who will want to know you're active again. Tell them I'm not active. I'm handling a personal matter. He paused. Just get me the file. He hung up and stood at the window for another minute. Then he went to make Emma's lunch for school because it was 7:15 and she needed a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, and those small, ordinary facts of his life were the only thing that made the rest of it possible to carry. He told Victoria that morning. Not on the phone, in person, in her office, with Marcus Webb present, because Marcus would need to know, and there was no point in the inefficiency of separate conversations. Logan sat across the desk, not quite in the same chair as before, and laid it out in plain language without unnecessary preamble. He told them about Operation Clearwater. Not all of it. Not the parts that were still classified by implication and instinct, rather than official status. Not the parts about his team or the specific tactics. But the shape of it. A hostage extraction, 2004, a 14-year-old girl, a criminal network's financier who escaped and spent 20 years rebuilding. He told them the financier's name was Damien Cross. He watched Victoria's face while he said it. She was very still. Her hands were on the desk, flat, controlled. The same posture she'd held 2 days ago when she told him about the photographs of Emma. She was good at keeping her face composed. But there was something happening beneath the surface that she couldn't fully suppress, a kind of internal weather that showed in the way her breathing changed slightly, and in the fact that she looked at the desk rather than at him when she spoke. 2004, she said. Yes. A coastal compound. She stopped, started again. I was 14. They'd had me for 11 days. I know. She looked up. You were there. I led the extraction team. The silence in the room was complete. Marcus Webb, who was not a man given to visible reactions, had set down his pen. Victoria looked at Logan with an expression that wasn't any one thing. Not gratitude, not shock, not relief, not the complicated weight of 20 years of a thing she'd thought about without resolution. It was all of those things occupying the same space at the same time, which meant her face was doing something very human and very difficult to describe. I've thought about that night, she said. Her voice was steady but with effort. Many times. I never knew who they were. The soldiers. I remember a face in the doorway for about 2 seconds. She paused. I asked my father afterward. He said he didn't know and couldn't find out. I hired 2 private investigators, different years, when I had money to spend. Neither of them found anything. The records were sealed, Logan said. The whole operation was buried. That was standard for that category of mission. You've been cleaning my floors, she said, and it came out slightly fractured at the edges. Not accusatory, not awed, just the plain bewilderment of a thing that was true and hard to hold all at once. For 3 years. I didn't know it was you, Logan said. Victoria Hale and Victoria Sinclair. The name change. The adoption. Your public profile has some background, but not that specific history. I didn't make the connection. He paused. I'm not sure it would have changed anything if I had. Marcus cleared his throat. So Cross found her first, used her to locate Hayes. When Hayes didn't surface on his own, he escalated to physical provocation. Yes, Logan said. And now that he's confirmed Hayes is here and is connected to Victoria, he'll move faster. He's already moving faster. The scouts in the lobby were confirmation, not the operation itself. Logan looked at Marcus. He's going to come at the building, not a small team. He's been waiting 20 years for this, and he's not going to send another 3-man crew he knows I can handle. He glanced at Victoria. You need to understand what that means. This isn't corporate espionage anymore. What's coming is closer to a military operation. Marcus looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. Tell me what you need, she said. First, Emma, Atta. He'd arranged it the day before, quietly, without telling anyone. A woman named Greta Solano, who ran the after-school program at Emma's school, and who was the most reliable person Logan had identified in his 7 years of careful observation of who could be trusted with the thing that mattered most to him. Greta was 61, practical, unsentimental, in the way of someone who'd raised 4 children of her own, and she thought Logan was a good if somewhat peculiar father who made his daughter very good sandwiches. He told her there was a family situation, not dangerous, he said, lying in the specific way that protected rather than deceived, and that Emma would be staying with Greta for a few days in the apartment above the school's community office, which had a guest room and a very sturdy door and was not on any document connected to Logan Hayes' name. He told Emma that evening. He sat on the edge of her bed and thought for a moment about how to do it without frightening her, and then he decided that Emma, at 7, deserved something close to the truth, even if not all of it. You're going to stay with Ms. Greta for a little while, he said. Emma looked at him. Why? Because my job has gotten complicated and I need to focus on it, and I focus better when I know you're somewhere safe. Is something wrong? He met her eyes. She had Rachel's eyes, the exact shade of brown, the quality of attention behind them. Looking at her sometimes was the most bittersweet thing he'd ever done, and he'd done some genuinely hard things. There are some people who are causing trouble, he said. I'm going to handle it, but while I'm handling it, I want you somewhere I don't have to worry about. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. Are you going to be okay? Yeah, he said. I'm going to be fine. Promise? He didn't make promises he wasn't certain he could keep. It was a rule. But he looked at his daughter's face, the worry in it, the trust underneath the worry, and he said, I'll be fine. That's not the same as a promise, but I mean it. She seemed to accept that. Emma had a tolerance for his particular brand of honest but not reassuring that most people didn't have. Maybe because she'd grown up with it. Maybe because she was just built that way. She hugged him before she went to sleep. It was the kind of hug that lasted a second longer than the ordinary kind, and when she pulled back, her face was matter-of-fact again, which was, he understood, her version of being brave. He sat with her until she was asleep. Then he went back to the kitchen table and the notepad with Cross's name on it, and he stayed there until 3 in the morning thinking through what was coming and what it would require. The file from Tate arrived the next morning, transmitted through a channel that would register as noise in any conventional monitoring system. It was extensive. Tate had pulled together 2 years of aggregated intelligence on Damian Cross's rebuilt organization. Not the full picture, which didn't exist in any single place, but enough. Cross was 61 now. He'd grown up in Eastern Europe, educated in England, built his first operation in the early 90s in the private security sector, and migrated into less legal territory gradually, the way organizations like his usually did, by expanding the definition of what they'd do for the right price until the original definition was unrecognizable. By the time of Clearwater in 2004, he'd been running leverage operations on 3 continents and had 11 people directly in his employ who had previously worked for various national intelligence services. The Clearwater extraction hadn't just cost him a hostage. It had cost him the senator's vote, which he'd needed to prevent a specific defense contract from going through, which he'd needed because he was positioned to benefit financially from the alternative contract, a complex arrangement that had taken him 4 years to build and that collapsed in about 72 hours after the girl was recovered. The financial loss was significant. The reputational damage among his network was worse. Organizations like his ran on credibility and fear, and a public failure of that magnitude, a senator's daughter taken and then extracted cleanly by special operations forces, announced to everyone who dealt with Damian Cross that he could be beaten. He'd spent the 2 decades since proving otherwise. Logan read the file twice. Then he read the personnel section a 3rd time, specifically the part about Cross's current head of enforcement operations, a man named Rourke, former private military, who had worked for 3 different contractors before Cross, and who had, according to Tate's intelligence, been responsible for planning the lobby operation. He circled Rourke's photograph in his mind, memorized it. Then he brought the file to Marcus. They spent 4 hours in a conference room with the blinds down, Logan and Marcus and Victoria laying out what they knew against what was coming. Marcus had his own intelligence from the FBI contact he'd maintained, a junior analyst who'd gone slightly beyond her authorization to pass along a summary of the Bureau's Damian Cross file, which added texture without adding resolution. The FBI knew Cross was active and knew he was in the city. They were building a case. Building a case was slow. "They're not going to get here in time," Logan said. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. "Days, not weeks." He tapped the file. "He's been patient for 20 years, but he's not patient anymore. He confirmed I'm here, he confirmed Victoria's accessible, and he knows we're now aware of him. Every day he waits is a day we fortify. He won't wait." "What does he want?" Victoria asked. "Specifically, is he trying to kill us, or he wants to destroy what matters to us?" Logan said, "the way we destroyed what mattered to him. The girl was bait to draw me out, to confirm the connection. Now that it's confirmed, he'll come for the building, for you and for me in the same place, so he can finish both threads at once." He paused. "And he'll make it hurt. That's important to him. This isn't just business for him anymore. It stopped being business about 19 years ago." Victoria absorbed that. She had both hands flat on the conference table, which Logan had noticed was what she did when she needed to anchor herself to something solid. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Marcus repeated with a different inflection, the word of a man rearranging his entire operational picture. "I want Carter Wells removed from access to Victoria's schedule, starting now," Logan said. "Don't fire him. Tell him," he thought for a second, "tell him there's an internal audit review, and he's been temporarily reassigned to a satellite office for compliance reasons. Standard language. He won't panic if it sounds bureaucratic." Marcus nodded. "And the building?" "I want to walk every floor, every entry point, every stairwell, every shaft and maintenance corridor. I want to know this building the way Cross's people know it, and right now they know it better than I do." He looked at Marcus directly. "Can you give me access in a full day without anyone asking questions?" "I can give you a uniform and a reason to be walking around with a clipboard, Marcus said. Which you already have, technically. The smallest thing that might have been a smile crossed Logan's face and was gone. Well, he spent the following day doing exactly that, working the building from the basement mechanical rooms to the roof access with a clipboard and a practiced expression of mild professional boredom. He took the freight elevators and the service stairwells and the maintenance corridors that most of the building's occupants didn't know existed. He mapped the security camera blind spots, which were numerous and poorly planned, the legacy of a system installed in phases by 3 different contractors over a decade. He noted the rooftop access points, 2 stairwell exits, and a mechanical room hatch, and the helicopter pad on the 42nd floor that ostensibly required a special authorization code, but whose lock was the same model he'd bypassed, in a different context, roughly 15 years ago. He found 4 security vulnerabilities that Marcus hadn't flagged, and one that was, frankly, embarrassing. A loading dock on the building's north side where the camera coverage had a 40-second gap during the automated sweep cycle, long enough to get a team inside. He brought his notes to Marcus that evening. Marcus looked at them. He looked at Logan. He said, "How long did it take you to find the dock issue?" "About 11 seconds, Logan said. Marcus said something under his breath that Logan didn't catch and didn't ask about. They spent the next 2 hours building a rapid response plan. Not a defensive position, which was a losing posture if cross came with the numbers. Tate's intelligence suggested he could field, but a containment architecture. Control the bottlenecks. Force the approach into corridors where numbers didn't matter as much as position. Marcus had 3 full-time security staff he trusted completely. He flagged 2 more from the after-hours team as reliable. 5 people, plus Logan, plus whatever Victoria herself was capable of in a crisis, which Logan suspected was more than it appeared. "It won't be enough if he comes heavy," Marcus said. "It'll have to be," Logan said. "We can't bring in outside help without tipping Cross that we know what's coming. And if he knows we know, he changes the approach and we lose the advantage of preparation." "What advantage? He's got more people." "He's got more people in a building I'm going to know better than they do." Logan folded the building schematic. "That's not nothing." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You've done this before, defending a fixed position against a larger force." "Twice," Logan said. "Once it worked out. Once it almost didn't." "Which was more recent?" "The one that almost didn't." Marcus nodded slowly. "Encouraging." Victoria found Logan on the 34th floor at 9 p.m., where he was doing a final walk of the northeast stairwell. She'd come alone, which was the kind of decision that would have made Marcus Webb deeply unhappy if he'd known, and she was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the executive kitchen in a way that suggested she'd thought about whether it was a reasonable thing to do and done it anyway. She handed him one without asking whether he wanted it. He took it. They stood in the stairwell landing for a moment, the building quiet around them, the sounds of the city filtering up faintly from 34 floors below. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right. When you were in the Navy, the extraction work, the missions, did you ever think about the people afterward? The ones you got out?" He looked at the coffee cup. "Sometimes." "Did you wonder what happened to them?" "Not usually. Not because I didn't care." He thought about how to say the next part. "Because the point was getting them out. What came after? That was their story to live. I was just a door that opened at the right moment." She was quiet for a second. "I thought about you, or whoever you were, the soldier in the doorway." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "For a long time, in therapy and outside of therapy, I thought about that moment. It was the moment everything changed, when I'd stopped believing anyone was coming and then someone came." She paused. "I used to wonder what kind of person does that, goes into a place like that for a stranger." "It was my job," Logan said. "I know that's what you'd say." He looked at her. She looked back. Outside, far below, a siren moved through the city and faded. "You were 14, he said. "You were scared and you'd been hit, and you'd been sitting in a dark room for 11 days, and you were still upright when I came through the door. You looked at me and you didn't make a single sound after the first one." He paused. "That was you, not me. I just opened the door." Victoria looked away. She blinked once, controlled. When she looked back, the composure was in place again, though slightly imperfect around the edges. "I should have fired you when I found out what you were," she said. That's what my lawyer would say. Liability, misrepresentation, the whole thing. Probably. Instead, I'm bringing you coffee in a stairwell at 9 o'clock at night while a career criminal is planning to attack my building. Life is complicated, Logan said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. They stood there for another minute in the quiet of the 34th floor landing, the building humming around them with the low mechanical life of a structure that never fully slept. Logan drank the coffee. It was good. The kind of good that came from an expensive machine tended by someone who knew what they were doing, nothing like the burnt sludge he made at home at 2 a.m. He noticed that and filed it away as something small and ordinary and separate from everything else, the way he'd been doing with small, ordinary things for 7 years. Then he set the cup down on the landing railing and said, "There's something I need to tell you about the roof access hatch on 42. And they went back to work. It came on a Tuesday. Logan had known it would be a Tuesday because Cross's operational pattern, as described in Tate's file and confirmed by 2 additional pieces of information that had come through in the intervening days, favored midweek execution. Mondays were too obvious, the start of a week, the moment when security protocols reset and attention was highest. Fridays were too variable, too much building traffic, too many civilian witnesses lingering into the evening. Tuesday gave Cross a building at moderate occupancy, a security rotation that had settled into its weekly rhythm, and a news cycle that wouldn't reach peak coverage until the following morning, by which time whatever he intended to accomplish would already be done. Logan had also known it would be at night. What he hadn't known was exactly how many men Cross would send, and that gap in his knowledge sat in his chest like a stone for the 3 days leading up to it. Tate's final count passed through at 11 p.m. Monday was 14, possibly 16. Cross had been running personnel in and out of the city for a week, using the logistics cover of his contracting front company, and Tate had tracked 12 of them to a warehouse facility 8 miles from the Blackstone Tower. The other 2 or 4 were unaccounted for, which meant they were either already positioned or running a separate approach. 14 to 6 was bad math. Logan had worked with worse, but not recently, and not with 3 of his 6 being security guards whose primary prior combat experience was managing drunk executives at corporate holiday parties. He'd told Marcus the numbers that morning. Marcus had been quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, okay then," which was, Logan thought, exactly the right response. They'd spent Monday reorganizing everything they'd built in the previous days. Logan had walked the floors twice more. He'd repositioned the 2 cameras covering the northeast stairwell to reduce the blind angle by 40%. He'd identified 6 choke points in the building's layout where a single person with the right positioning could slow or stop a multi-man approach, and he'd assigned each one a protocol and a fallback. Marcus's 3 trusted security staff, a woman named Chen, a former cop named Briggs, and a quiet young man named Ortega, who had done 2 years in the Army and didn't talk about it, had been briefed and equipped and positioned. The 2 after-hours guards were staged at the loading dock on the north side, the embarrassing gap Logan had found on his first walkthrough. Victoria had not been sent home. Logan had considered it and rejected it twice. Cross would have her building monitored, and Cross would notice her absence, and it would change his approach in ways Logan couldn't fully predict. Better to have the variable he knew. Victoria in the building, in the secured executive suite on the 38th floor, with its reinforced door and its separate ventilation and its panic room that Marcus had installed 3 years ago at the previous CEO's request, and that the previous CEO had thankfully never needed. He'd talked to Emma at 4 p.m. She was at Greta Solano's 3 miles away, eating what Greta described as pasta with a truly unnecessary amount of cheese, which Emma apparently found ideal. "Dad, she has a cat," Emma said. "His name is Professor." "That's a good name for a cat." "He sat on my homework." "Smart cat." "Dad." She said it with a 7-year-old's specific brand of patience for adults who were being silly. "Are you okay?" "I'm good, Em. You be good for Ms. Greta." "I'm always good." "I know you are." He'd hung up and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he'd put it in his pocket and gone to check the north stairwell one more time. Cross's team came through 3 entry points simultaneously at 11:47 p.m. The loading dock, as expected. The north stairwell emergency exit, whose alarm had been disabled remotely, which told Logan that Cross still had a contact inside the building's technical systems, someone below the level of Carter Wells who hadn't been identified yet. And the freight elevator shaft on the building's west side, where two men descended from the roof via cable, bypassing the elevator entirely. Logan knew about the first two within seconds. The roof approach he didn't know about until Ortega, stationed in the west corridor on the 20th floor, radioed that he had movement in the elevator shaft and that it didn't sound like mechanical. "Stay back," Logan said into his earpiece. "Don't engage yet. Let me know which floor they exit." He was on the 16th floor when the dock breach hit. He heard it through Chen's earpiece, not her voice, but the sound behind her, the specific percussion of a door taken hard and fast. And then Chen's voice, tight but controlled. "Dock is breached. I count 5, moving towards service corridor." "Fall back to the 12th, Logan said. "Corridor B. Do not engage in the open." "Copy." The north stairwell breach came 30 seconds later. Briggs, stationed on the 8th floor landing, reported 4 men moving up fast. He sounded steady, which Logan was grateful for. Some people sounded steady until they weren't, but Briggs had a quality in his voice that was consistent with someone who had genuinely processed the situation rather than just suppressed his reaction to it. "Hold the landing," Logan said. "When they're 2 floors below you, fall back to the 11th. Make noise. I want them following you." "You want them following me," Briggs repeated, the way a man repeats something to confirm he heard it correctly, and also to register his feelings about it. "Yes. Single file in a stairwell is the worst approach position there is. I need them strung out and chasing, not stacked and organized." A pause. "Understood." Logan was already moving. He took the east stairwell at a pace that was faster than running should look on stairs, the way he'd once been able to move without thinking about it, and now had to consciously allow his body to remember. His knee, old damage, a jump from a ship's deck in conditions that hadn't been recommended, complained on the 3rd landing, and he told it silently that it would have to wait. He hit the dock team first. Chen had done exactly what he'd asked, fallen back, drawn them into Corridor B on the 12th floor, a long, narrow service passage that ran between the building's 2 elevator banks. 5 men in a corridor that wide moved in 2 and 3 formation, which compressed their ability to respond laterally. Logan came from the north end, which was behind them, because Chen's falling back had pulled all 5 of their attention south. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not clean or controlled or anything that Logan would describe with pride. It was close, dark, physical, and loud in the specific way that enclosed spaces amplified impact and breath and the sounds men made when things went wrong for them. He took a hit to his left ribs before he'd finished with the first man, someone turning faster than expected, a forearm catching him hard enough to move him sideways. And he worked through it because working through it was the only available option. He put 3 of the 5 down. The 4th managed to get 20 feet back toward the dock before Logan caught him. And the 5th, to his credit, saw what had happened to the others and made a decision that probably saved his life by retreating back toward the loading bay. Logan let him go. He needed to move. His ribs were bad. Not broken. He'd broken ribs before and knew the specific grinding sensation, which this wasn't quite, but the deep soft tissue damage that made every breath a considered decision. He pressed his forearm against his side and went for the stairwell. Briggs had done his job well. The north stairwell team was strung across 3 floors, chasing a man who kept not being where they expected him to be. And when Logan entered the stairwell from the 14th floor landing, he had positional advantage on the 2 at the rear of their loose column. He moved fast and kept moving, floor to floor, using the stairwell's geometry the way he'd mapped it. The landing angles, the sightline breaks, the specific acoustic properties of concrete and steel that told you where a man was before you could see him. He was bleeding from somewhere on his left arm by the 15th floor. He didn't know when that had happened. He noticed it because his sleeve was wet and his grip was slightly compromised, and he adjusted accordingly and kept going. Ortega radioed at the 16th floor. "They're out of the shaft on 18, 2 of them, heading for the executive corridor." 38 was the executive floor. The panic room was on 38, but the executive corridor also fed the main freight elevator, which meant, "They're not going to 38, Logan said. "They're going for the server room on 22. Cut the building's internal communications." A second of silence. "How do you—" "Because if I were Cross, I'd blind the building before I sent the main force up. Move to 22, North Junction. Stop them before they reach the server room door." I'm not, Ortega's voice was controlled but thin. I'm not trained for this kind of, you don't have to be trained for it. You just have to get there first and close the junction door and hold it. The door is steel. It locks from the inside. Can you do that? Yeah, Ortega said with the specific firmness of someone who has just decided something. Yeah, I can do that. Go, Juan. The main force, as Logan had named it to himself, the remaining 7 or 8 men he hadn't yet engaged, came through the north stairwell upper entrance on the 26th floor at 12:19 a.m. They came in organized, which meant Rourke was with them, because disorganized teams didn't maintain that kind of entry discipline when they knew the building was defended, and 3 of their dock team weren't responding to radio. Logan knew Rourke was there because Rourke's operational signature was in the file, and because the approach pattern split into 2 elements, one taking the stairwell and one moving through the 26th floor office space toward the secondary elevator, was exactly the kind of coverage before advance that an experienced PMC operator instilled in his people. He also knew Rourke was there because Rourke found him on the 28th floor. Logan had been moving through the darkened open-plan office space, the kind of floor that was all glass partitions and standing desks, and those hanging light fixtures that looked like someone suspended a bunch of pendant lamps from the ceiling and hoped for the best, when a figure came through the east partition fast and without hesitation. Not a probe. A man who knew he had the right target. Rourke was 43, former British SAS before his private years, and he moved the way men did when their body had been doing this specific thing for 2 decades. Efficiently and without apparent effort, which made him different from the men downstairs in a way Logan registered immediately. They went through 2 glass partitions before either of them got any real purchase. The first partition shattered loudly and showered both of them with safety glass that didn't cut but stung, and then a desk went sideways and Logan caught an elbow across the ear that made the floor tilt for a nauseating second, and he used the momentum of the tilt to drag Rourke's arm across his body in a direction it wasn't designed to travel. Rourke made a sound. His right arm lost its usefulness. He didn't stop moving. They went back and forth across that floor for 3 minutes in the dark, and it was ugly, and neither of them were young men operating at peak capacity. Logan's ribs screamed with every breath. Rourke was compromised on his right side, and both of them were bleeding on at least 2 surfaces each. Logan won it eventually, not cleanly, because there was nothing clean about any of it, and he left Rourke zip-tied to a standing desk support column and took his radio. He stood bent over his knees for about 15 seconds, breathing with deliberate care. His left arm was worse now. He straightened up. Rourke looked up at him from the floor. His face was a mess, but his eyes were sharp and clear and full of a precise professional hatred. "He's going to the roof," Rourke said. It came out slightly garbled. His lip was split. "You know that." Logan looked at him. "He was never going to send enough people to take you down here," Rourke said. "He knows you. He read your file. He knows you fight best in enclosed spaces, working the geometry, one at a time." He spat blood. "Every man you stopped down here was a man he expected to lose. He just needed you busy." Logan was already moving before Rourke finished the sentence. The roof access on 42 was the mechanical room hatch that Logan had told Victoria about on the 34th floor landing, standing in the stairwell with coffee cups while the city murmured below them. The one whose lock was the same model he'd bypassed 15 years ago. He'd refit the lock the morning after that conversation, replacing the mechanism with a deadbolt that required a physical key on both sides. He'd kept the key. He came through the 42nd floor at a dead run, which was a loose interpretation of what his body was currently capable of, and hit the mechanical room door at 12:31 a.m. The hatch was open. He went through it. The roof of Blackstone Global was a flat expanse of ventilation machinery, HVAC units, antenna housings, and the raised frame of the helicopter platform on the north end. The city spread out in every direction, a grid of light against the dark, and the wind up here was strong enough to push against him with real weight. The night was clear, cold in the way of late autumn, and for a half-second the sheer scale of the open space after 30 floors of corridors and stairwells made his body recalibrate. Damian Cross was standing near the center of the roof. He was older than Logan had expected, which was irrational because, of course, he was older. The file had said 61, and 61 was what Logan was looking at. A lean man in a dark coat, silver at his temples, carrying himself with the particular uprightness of someone who had spent decades insisting on being taken seriously. He had two men flanking him who had weapons drawn and trained on Logan the instant he came through the hatch. Logan stopped. He was 10 meters from Cross. The two flanking men were positioned at slight angles, one slightly left, one slightly right, both close enough to Cross that a direct move on him would bring at least one of them into contact range. "Mr. Hayes," Cross said. His accent was a complicated layering of 3 countries. "You look terrible." "I've had a rough night," Logan said. "I imagine you have." Cross tilted his head slightly, the way a man does when he's examining something he's been thinking about for a long time. "I expected you to be better than what I saw downstairs. The reports I had on you suggested something more impressive." "Your reports were 20 years old." "Fair point." Cross looked at him steadily. "You should know the woman is fine. My interest was never in harming her directly. She's a mechanism, not a target." "Then what am I?" "You're the loose end that cost me everything." Cross said it with no particular heat, not performed calm, but the actual absence of the emotion most people would have brought to it, which was, in its own way, more unnerving than rage would have been. "I don't hate you, Mr. Hayes. You were doing your job. I understand that. But you destroyed what I built. And justice, real justice, not the legal kind, requires a proportional response." "Destroying what I built," Logan said. "My daughter." Cross's expression didn't shift. "She's fine. She wasn't part of tonight's operation. She was a tool to confirm your location and nothing beyond that." A pause. "You have my word." "Your word," Logan said. "I'm aware of what that's worth to you. I'm offering it anyway because it happens to be true." Logan looked at him. He believed it, which was the complicated thing. Not because Cross was a good man or an honest one, but because Cross was the kind of man whose word on specific operational things was reliable, because his entire network ran on the credibility of his commitments. If he said Emma wasn't a target, Emma wasn't a target. That didn't change what was happening on this roof. "So what does this look like?" Logan said. "You've got 2 men and whatever's left downstairs, and you've had 20 years to plan how this ends." "It looks like you walking away," Cross said. "Tonight you leave this building. You take your daughter and you leave this city, and you spend the rest of whatever life you have left being very, very invisible, which I understand you're quite good at. Victoria Sinclair loses her company through means that are entirely legal and that I've been constructing for 18 months. And you spend the rest of your days knowing that the decision you made in 2004 cost that young woman everything she built." He let that sit for a moment. "That's what it looks like. You walk away and she loses everything, or you don't walk away and both of you lose more." The wind pushed across the roof. A ventilation unit hummed nearby. "You spent 20 years, Logan said. You burned everything to get to this moment, on this roof, and your offer is that I walk away." "My offer is that you survive," Cross said. "What I built can outlast both of us. It already has. The financial mechanisms targeting Sinclair's company don't require me to be present to execute. They'll run without me." Something moved in his face. Not quite contempt, not quite something else. "You beat me 20 years ago because you had a team in preparation and institutional support. Tonight you have a bad arm and cracked ribs, and 2 men between you and me with better weapons than you're carrying. I'm being practical." "The thing about practical," Logan said, "is that it assumes I'm trying to win the same way you are." He'd been watching the 2 flanking men while talking, not watching them directly, tracking them at the edge of his attention, the way he'd been trained to do, the way he'd never fully unlearned. The one on the left was slightly more comfortable than the one on the right. The one on the right kept his weight on his back foot, which meant if he moved forward, he'd have to reset first. And Cross, despite everything, despite 20 years and careful planning and the undeniable intelligence of his approach, had a habit Logan had noticed in the first 30 seconds on the roof. When he was making a point, when he was certain of something, he shifted his weight to his right foot, and his attention narrowed to the person he was addressing. He was doing it right now. 40 seconds were the worst 40 seconds of his recent life, which included the hallways downstairs and the fight with Rourke and the 3-day stretch after Rachel died when Emma was 4 days old, and he didn't know yet how to keep both of them alive. The man on the right reset exactly as Logan had predicted, which bought him a half second. The man on the left was faster and better, and caught Logan across the back with something that dropped him to one knee on the rooftop surface, and Logan fought back up from that position because going down fully was not survivable. He was bleeding more now from the arm. His vision had a narrow quality at the edges that he recognized as blood pressure and pushed against with focused breathing. He got the left side man down. The right side man he got down and then back up. The man recovered faster than he should have been able to. And Logan took another hit to the ribs that made the breath stop for a very specific terrible second, and he converted the pain into forward motion the way he'd learned to do in training in conditions that had seemed designed to break people rather than prepare them. He got both men down. He stood on the roof and breathed for a moment. His whole left side was wrong. His arm was definitely not just bleeding anymore. There was a structural problem in the shoulder that he wasn't going to be able to address up here. Cross had moved. He was near the edge of the helicopter platform, 10 feet farther than before, and he was looking at Logan with the first genuine expression Logan had seen from him. Not fear, not panic, but the careful recalculation of a man revising his probability estimates in real time. "That's not possible," Cross said. "I told you your reports were 20 years old," Logan said. He crossed the distance. Cross fought. Logan gave him that. He wasn't a man who gave up. And it was brief and decisive, and Logan was not careful or controlled about it because he was past careful and controlled. He was running on the same thing he'd been running on since 11:47 p.m., and before that since Emma's face in her bedroom when he told her there were people causing trouble, and before that the photograph of Emma on the school sidewalk taken from a long lens by someone who had thought his daughter was a tool to use. When it was over, Cross was on the rooftop, and Logan was standing above him with both of his wrists controlled. He was also, he realized distantly, sitting down, which meant his legs had made a decision he hadn't fully approved. Cross looked up at him. His face was bloody. His composure was cracked in places but not gone. It was too structural to go entirely. "You're badly injured," Cross said. "Yeah," Logan said. He wasn't going to argue it. "The mechanisms I described, the financial operations, will get dismantled," Logan said. "You're going to give us everything you have on them, and they're going to get dismantled." He paused. "Because the alternative is that I let Tate know where you are and what you've built, and then you have a different set of problems." "Tate," Cross said. Something crossed his face. "He's been running this city's intelligence network for 16 years. He burned me twice before I adjusted." A pause. "He told you about me." "He told me a lot." "He'll want more than information. That's between you and him," Logan said. "I'm not interested in your long-term problems. I'm interested in one night on one roof and the woman downstairs and my daughter 3 miles away eating pasta with a cat named Professor." He tightened his grip on Cross's wrist, not to cause pain, but to punctuate. "Give me the financial operation details, all of them, and whoever you have inside this building's technical systems, name and contact." Cross looked at him for a long moment. The wind came across the roof. Somewhere below, far down, Logan could hear the first sirens. Someone had finally called the police, which meant the clock was running now on how long he could stay up here before this became a different kind of complicated. "You won't disappear this time," Cross said. "After tonight. Too many people know who you are." "I know," Logan said. It was the first time he'd said that out loud. He'd been thinking it since the lobby, since the footage, since Victoria's office, and Marcus's conference room and the stairwell on the 34th floor with the coffee cups. Too many people knew. 7 years of careful quiet, and one Thursday night had taken it apart. He found he wasn't as destroyed by that as he'd expected to be. "The financial operation," he said again. "Start talking." Cross started talking. Logan knelt on the rooftop with his shoulder wrong and his ribs bad, and the city blazing below him in all directions. And he listened, and he held on, and the sirens got louder. 12 minutes later, Marcus came through the hatch with 2 of his people and found Logan still there, still upright technically, cross-secured with cable ties to the helicopter platform frame, the 2 flanking men conscious and not going anywhere. Marcus looked at the scene. He looked at Logan. He took in the shoulder and the arm and the general condition of a man who had done something that should have required more people. "You're an idiot," Marcus said. "Probably," Logan said. "Can you stand up?" "I'm working on it," Logan said. And he did. The hospital kept him for 4 days. That was 2 days longer than Logan wanted, and 2 days shorter than the attending physician, a brisk woman named Dr. Kaur, who had clearly dealt with stubborn patients before and had developed a tone specifically for them, believed was medically appropriate. The shoulder required surgery, a torn labrum, and two structures that had been pushed beyond what the body tolerates quietly. And the ribs, which had turned out to be two cracked and one fully fractured, required the kind of enforced stillness that Logan found almost physically painful in itself. The arm wound was the simplest thing, which was ironic given that it had bled the most. A deep laceration along the outer forearm that had needed 22 stitches and a course of antibiotics, and a nurse named Gerald, who changed the dressing every morning with the cheerful efficiency of someone who genuinely liked his work. Emma came on the second day. Greta Solano drove her, and Emma walked into the hospital room with her backpack on and her sketchbook under her arm, and the expression of a child who had been told everything was fine by multiple adults and had decided to verify this personally. She looked at the shoulder sling and the stitched arm and the bruising on his face that had developed into something genuinely impressive over 48 hours. And she stood at the foot of the bed and assessed him with those dark eyes that were Rachel's eyes. And she said, "You said you'd be fine." "I am fine," Logan said. "You have a sling." "The sling is temporary." She came around to the chair beside the bed and sat down and opened her sketchbook, which he recognized as her way of processing something she wasn't ready to talk about directly. She drew for a while. He watched her draw. The room had the particular quality of hospital rooms in the afternoon. Thin light through institutional blinds, the sound of a corridor beyond the closed door, the low hum of equipment that was monitoring things he didn't need to think about. After about 10 minutes, she said, without looking up from her drawing, "Were you protecting someone?" "Yes." "Ms. Victoria?" He paused. "How do you know about her?" "Ms. Greta showed me the news on her tablet." Emma turned a page. It said a janitor stopped bad guys from hurting people in a building. It didn't say your name, but Miss Greta said she thought it was probably you because of your job, and also because she appeared to be choosing her words, because you have a face like someone who knows how to do that. Logan looked at his daughter. "Ms. Greta said that?" "She said you have quiet eyes. She says people with quiet eyes have usually seen a lot." Emma glanced up briefly. "Were you in the Army?" "Navy." She nodded, absorbing this with a seriousness he recognized as genuine. Emma didn't ask questions to perform curiosity. When she asked something, she wanted to actually know. "Were you good at it?" He thought about the honest answer. "I was good at the parts that kept people alive. I wasn't always good at the parts after." She seemed to understand that, or to accept it pending future understanding, which was close enough. She went back to drawing. He looked at the ceiling. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "I'm glad you're okay." Pause. "Even with the sling." "Me too, Em," he said. "Me too." The aftermath came in waves, the way aftermath always does. Not a single confrontation, but a series of them, each one requiring something different. The police first. Detective Reyes, who had taken his statement in the lobby on the night of the first incident, came to the hospital on day 3 with a partner and a recorder and the careful professional manner of someone who had been briefed extensively and was still working out what to make of what she'd been told. She had questions about the roof, about Cross and his men, about the financial operation details Logan had extracted before Marcus arrived with the cable ties. She had questions about the prior incidents and Logan's involvement in investigating them. She had a lot of questions, and Logan answered what he could and deflected what he couldn't with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 20 years navigating exactly this kind of conversation. At the end of it, she looked at him with the expression she'd had in the lobby, that combination of professional assessment and something more human underneath it. "You understand," she said, "that the way you handled this created significant legal complexity." "I understand that," Logan said. 11 men were hospitalized, 2 with serious injuries. "They came into the building armed and with intent to harm civilians," Logan said. "I did what the situation required." "What the situation required," she repeated, not arguing it, turning it over. "Detective," Logan said, "I've given you Cross's complete financial operation. 18 months of constructed mechanisms targeting Victoria Sinclair's company, 2 shell company networks, the name of his technical inside contact in the building's systems, and the location of the warehouse facility his team staged from. That's enough to close a 9-year FBI case and take apart an organization that's been operating across 3 countries. He paused. "I'd like to go home at some point." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she clicked off the recorder. The FBI is very happy, she said, in a tone that suggested she personally found the FBI's happiness somewhat beside the point. That's going to matter more than my questions in the end. She stood to leave. At the door, she stopped. Administrative, she said. He looked at her. You told me Navy? Administrative. The first night? The corner of her mouth moved very slightly. I want you to know I've thought about that a few times since. She left. Logan looked at the ceiling again at him. Victoria came on day 4, an hour before Dr. Kaur was persuaded to sign the discharge paperwork. She came alone, which Logan had come to understand was her preference when the conversation was going to be real rather than managed. She was in clothes that weren't the executive uniform, dark jeans, a plain jacket, her hair down in a way that made her look younger and also, somehow, more like herself. She sat in the same chair Emma had used and looked at the sling and didn't say anything about it, which he appreciated. The financial operations are being dismantled, she said. The FBI moved fast once they had Cross's information. 3 of the shell entities are already frozen. The mechanisms he built into the company's board structure are being unwound. It's going to take months and it's going to be ugly with the lawyers, but it's survivable. She paused. The company is fine. Or it will be. Good, Logan said. Carter Wells has been formally arrested. The technical contact, a man in the building's IT infrastructure named Graves, was picked up yesterday. She looked at her hands. I've had 11 different executives and 2 board members ask me in the last 3 days what actually happened. I've told them there was a security incident that has been resolved. She glanced up. That's going to hold for approximately a month before someone starts pulling threads. You'll figure it out, Logan said. You're good at managing information. I'm better at it when people aren't actively trying to ruin me, she said, with a dryness that was the closest she got to humor when she was tired. Then, more quietly, I want to talk to you about something. Okay. When I was 14, she said, and they had me in that room, the 11 days, I spent a lot of that time telling myself a story. The story was that I was going to be okay, not because I knew it, but because I needed something to hold on to. She paused. Part of that story, eventually, was that someone was going to come. I don't know why I believed that. There was no evidence for it by day 8 or 9, but I held on to it because the alternative was falling apart, and I was very determined not to fall apart. She looked at him steadily. Someone came. Logan said nothing. What I'm trying to say, badly, is that I've been carrying that for 20 years. The weight of it, what it made me, how it drove me. I built all of this. She gestured, a small movement that encompassed the company, the career, everything, partly out of the specific terror of ever being that powerless again. Every floor I added to that building, every acquisition, every deal, was me telling myself I was building something no one could take. She stopped. Cross almost took it anyway. But he didn't, Logan said. No. She looked at him. You didn't let him. We didn't let him, Logan said. Marcus, Chen, and Briggs and Ortega. You for staying in the building when you could have run. I wanted to run, she said. I didn't, but I wanted to. That's what courage actually is, Logan said. Not being scared. Wanting to run and not running. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have a proposal. Marcus mentioned you might. I want to offer you the position of Chief of Security for Blackstone Global. Full authority over the security structure, personnel, protocols. Salary that would allow you to stop cleaning floors at midnight. Not that there's anything wrong with cleaning floors. She said it without the corporate packaging, which he respected. Emma would have stability. A school she doesn't have to leave. A city she could actually grow up in. Logan looked at his hands. The left one had the stitched forearm, the bandaging, the slight swelling at the wrist that Dr. Kaur had said was minor, and he chose to believe. The right was just his hand, the mop callus still there, the knuckle scarring that predated everything else, the plain, unimpressive hand of a man who had carried a lot of things over a long time. I've moved 4 times in 7 years, he said. Emma's been in 3 different schools. She makes friends, and then she leaves them. He paused. She doesn't complain about it. She's the least complaining person I've ever known, which I think means she learned at some point that complaining didn't change anything, and I'm not sure that's a good thing for a kid to learn. No, Victoria said. It isn't. I've been protecting her by keeping her small, Logan said. Small life, small footprint, nothing that could be found. And what happened this week is going to happen. Something is going to happen. As long as I'm living in a way that's about hiding instead of about actually building something. He looked up. I think I've known that for a while. I just needed it to become impossible to ignore. Is that a yes? He thought about Emma's horse drawing on the floor of the break room. He thought about the photograph of Rachel on the bedroom wall in the Carver Street apartment, the one he'd been packing and unpacking across 4 cities without once considering leaving it behind. He thought about Rachel herself, who had been in his life for 6 years before Emma arrived and took them both apart and put them back differently, and who had told him once, in the particular directness she had when something mattered, that the thing she loved most about him was that he was always trying to protect everyone except himself. She'd said it like it was an endearing flaw. He'd been working out for 7 years whether it was. It's a yes, he said, with conditions. Name them. Emma's life comes first. Whatever the job requires, if it conflicts with what Emma needs, Emma wins. Agreed. I run the security structure my way. Marcus reports to me, not around me. Marcus will accept that or Marcus will find other employment, Victoria said, with the calm of someone who meant it. And I'm not a symbol, Logan said. I'm not a story you tell at press conferences or a face you put in a corporate communications piece. What I do and how I do it stays internal. Victoria nodded. I wouldn't have it any other way. She paused. Anything else? He thought for a moment. The break room on the first floor, the one with the fluorescent light that buzzes. What about it? Fix the light, he said. She looked at him. Then she did something he hadn't quite seen from her before. She laughed. Not a managed professional laugh, but an actual one, brief and real, the kind that surprised the person doing it. It changed her face in a way that was, he noticed, significant. I'll have it done Monday, she said. Well, I was discharged that afternoon. He collected his daughter from Greta Solano's apartment, thanked Greta in the plain, specific way she preferred over elaborate expressions of gratitude, and met Professor the cat, who was gray and indifferent, and sat on the back of the couch regarding Logan with the philosophical detachment of a creature who had long since made peace with the world's disorder. Emma said goodbye to Professor with the solemnity of someone parting from a long acquaintance. They went back to the Carver Street apartment. Logan made dinner, spaghetti with the jarred sauce Emma preferred over the kind he made from scratch, which she found, inexplicably, too tomatoey. They ate at the kitchen table with the wobbly leg. Emma told him about the homework she'd done at Greta's, and the drawing she'd finished, and the fact that Professor had knocked her juice glass over twice and seemed pleased with himself both times. After dinner, he told her they weren't moving again. She put her fork down. She looked at him with that Rachel look, the full attention, nothing held back. We're staying? She said. We're staying. In this apartment? We'll probably move to a better one, Logan said, closer to your school. But in this city. This is where we live now. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her work through it. Not the surface of it, but the actual weight of what he'd said, which she understood better than most adults would have credited. Because of what happened? She asked. Because it was time, he said. What happened just made it clear. Emma picked her fork back up. She twirled some spaghetti. She seemed to be having an internal conversation whose resolution was private. Then she said, Can I get a cat? Logan looked at her. No. A small one? No. What if it was very well behaved? Cats are never well behaved. That's the entire premise of a cat. She considered this. What about a fish? A fish, he said, is a possibility. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her spaghetti. The kitchen was warm and the table wobbled slightly when she leaned on it, and through the window the city was doing its ordinary evening things, and Logan sat across from his daughter and let himself be in it, actually in it, not watching it through glass, not cataloging exit routes and threat vectors, just presented a kitchen table with bad jarred sauce and a 7-year-old who was negotiating toward a fish. It was the most ordinary thing. It was, he thought, just about everything. What? The weeks that followed were not simple, because nothing after something like that is simple. There were lawyers and depositions, and a federal process that moved at its own geological pace. There were security consultants from 3 firms who came to Blackstone Global, and spent 4 days assessing everything Marcus and Logan had done and produced a report that contained, Logan was told, several observations that amounted to the professional equivalent of baffled admiration. Marcus shared this information with the precise expression of a man who had decided to be gracious about it. The FBI closed their cross-investigation, formally, with the completeness that 9 years of open case files require. 11 weeks after the roof, Cross himself was charged across 6 jurisdictions. His organization, without him and without Rourke, and without the infrastructure he'd spent 2 decades building, collapsed inward the way these structures always did when the center gave way. Not all at once, but in sections, each section's fall accelerating the next. The government came in the 4th week. 2 men in good suits who identified themselves with federal credentials that Logan examined carefully and found legitimate, who sat across from him in a conference room at Blackstone and made their case with the practiced ease of people who had made similar cases before. There was a position available, they said. His record would be restored, his rank reinstated. He'd left as a senior chief petty officer, the equivalent of a sergeant major in Army terms, which meant the reinstatement was not a small gesture. There were people, they said, who believed his particular skill set was wasted in the private sector. Logan listened to all of it. He'd known something like this was coming, had felt it gathering since the discharge paperwork, and the detective with the recorder and the federal agents processing Cross's warehouse. When they finished, he said, "I appreciate it. But," the first man said, "but I have a daughter who just started at a new school and is currently in negotiations for a fish," Logan said, "and a job I've committed to, and a city I'm not leaving." The 2 men looked at him. The first one seemed to weigh something. "We expected that answer," he said. "We wanted to offer it anyway." "I know," Logan said. "That's why I listened to the whole thing." They shook hands. They left. Logan sat in the conference room alone for a moment, feeling the particular quality of a door closing. Not with regret, but with the solid, deliberate sound of a decision that had been made and was finished being made. He'd been 22 years old when he went into that compound in 2004. He'd been doing a job he believed in with everything he had, and then he'd spent the 2 decades since carrying the weight of what that job had cost him and the people around him. Rachel had known what she was taking on when she married him. She hadn't been naive about the person she loved, and he'd been grateful for that every single day of the 6 years they'd had. When she was gone, he'd sealed the operational part of himself in the same room as all the other things too heavy to look at, and he'd carried Emma forward into a small, quiet life that was about protection, because protection was the only thing he trusted himself to provide. What he understood now, sitting in an empty conference room in a building he was responsible for keeping safe, with the city moving outside the windows, was that protection and presence weren't the same thing. He'd given Emma protection for 7 years. He hadn't always given her presence. The man who watched the exits while his daughter talked about blueberry pancakes was doing one thing right and missing something essential. He didn't know if Rachel would have told him that. He thought she might have, eventually, with the specific patience she'd had for his particular blind spots. He thought she'd have waited until he was ready to hear it, and then she'd have said it plainly, without softening it, because that was how she was. He missed her with a completeness that hadn't shrunk in 7 years. He'd stopped expecting it to. But he was also, and this was the thing he turned over carefully, because it was new and slightly unfamiliar, not just surviving it anymore. Something in the last 3 weeks had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way he could pin to a single moment, but the way a season shifts, gradually, then all at once, and suddenly the quality of the light was different. In the 3rd month, Emma got the fish. It was a betta, blue and red, extravagant fins, the aggressively aesthetic product of selective breeding over centuries, and it lived in a small tank on Emma's desk next to her sketchbook and her growing collection of horse drawings. She named it Admiral because she had recently learned that her father had been in the Navy and found this enormously significant. Logan had not told her the full shape of what he'd been in the Navy. He would, eventually, in pieces, as she got older, calibrated to what she was ready for. She would ask the questions when she was ready for the answers, and he'd learned that she was good at knowing when that was. He would trust her with it incrementally, the way you build something meant to last. Victoria Sinclair came to the new apartment twice in that 1st month. Once for a practical reason, a contract document that needed his signature, and that she chose to bring personally rather than courier, And once for no reason, she articulated beyond showing up on a Saturday afternoon with a bag that turned out to contain the components for homemade pizza, which Emma regarded as an extremely positive development. They made pizza at the kitchen table, the new one, which didn't wobble. Emma directing the process with the confidence of someone who had firm opinions about cheese distribution, Victoria following instructions with an earnestness that suggested she didn't make pizza often, and was taking it seriously, Logan watching both of them and contributing where directed and not saying much because the scene didn't require commentary. At one point, Emma, applying pepperoni with geometric precision, said, without looking up, "Are you and my dad friends?" Victoria glanced at Logan. Logan maintained an expression of pure neutrality. "We work together," Victoria said, "and I think we're becoming friends." "He doesn't have a lot of friends," Emma said, still focused on the pepperoni. "It's okay, he's an introvert." Ms. Greta explained what that means. Ms. Greta explained a lot of things, Logan said. "She's very smart," Emma said. "She is," he agreed. Victoria was looking at the pizza with an expression Logan needed a moment to identify, because it was one of the more unguarded things he'd seen on her face. It was something close to ease, not the managed composure of her professional life, not the stripped-back steadiness she'd shown in the worst moments of the last 3 months, but something quieter than both of those. The expression of someone who had arrived somewhere they hadn't expected and found it unexpectedly good. He understood it. He felt something similar himself. In the mild and impermanent way, he was allowing himself to feel things again, carefully, without rushing it, the way you relearn something after a long absence. After dinner, Victoria helped Emma carry the dishes to the kitchen, and Emma showed her admiral the fish and gave a detailed account of his personality, which she had spent 3 weeks carefully observing. Logan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his daughter explain betta fish behavior to a woman who ran a 42-floor company, who was nodding along with the seriousness the subject apparently warranted. There was nothing resolved about it. Victoria was still rebuilding a company from a near collapse, still unwinding the legal machinery that Cross had spent 18 months constructing. Logan was still learning a job that was genuinely different from anything his previous life had prepared him for. Different in the ways that mattered, the administrative patience it required, the organizational thinking, the management of people whose well-being was his responsibility in a way that was less acute and more sustained than anything he'd done before. His shoulder was still healing, his sleep was still not always straightforward. Emma still sometimes drew horses on the backs of her homework pages and presented them to him as though the homework were incidental. None of it was finished, none of it was neat. But there was a quality to the apartment on an ordinary Saturday night. The fish tank light, and the pizza smell, and the sound of his daughter's voice explaining something she cared about, that he recognized as the actual texture of a life being lived, as opposed to a life being survived. There is a thing that men who have spent their years in the service of something large and abstract, a country, an ideal, a mission, sometimes discover too late, that the large and abstract things cannot be loved the way a specific person can be loved. They can be served, they can be protected, but they cannot sit across from you at a kitchen table and argue about cheese distribution, and they cannot tell you in the serious tone of a 7-year-old that you're an introvert and it's okay, and they cannot look at a fish tank with the concentrated pleasure of someone who has wanted exactly this thing and is now in the presence of it. Logan Hayes had spent 20 years being a man who went into hard places so that other people could have ordinary ones. He'd believed in that. He still believed in it, in the way you believe in something you gave yourself to when you were young, and that cost you things you couldn't get back. But he was 37 years old, and his daughter was in the next room with a fish named Admiral, and the woman who had once been a terrified 14-year-old in a locked room was telling Emma something that made Emma laugh, that specific whole-body laugh that came from somewhere real, and it was Saturday, and no one was coming through any doors tonight. He thought about Rachel. He thought about what she'd have said about all of it. The fish, the job, the company of a woman who brought homemade pizza supplies and took cheese distribution seriously. He thought she'd have had something precise and probably slightly funny to say about it, and that she'd have said it with the direct warmth she'd always had, and he'd have laughed at it, and then she'd have squeezed his arm and gone back to whatever she was doing. He didn't know what the next thing looked like. He'd spent 7 years making the future as small as possible so there was less of it to get wrong. And now the future was larger than that again, and uncertain in the way that larger futures are. And he was not going to pretend he was entirely comfortable with that. But Emma's laugh was in the next room, and the city was outside the window. And for the first time in a very long time, Logan Hayes was not watching for what was coming. He was just there. That, he thought, was enough to start with. The hospital kept him for 4 days, which was 3 days longer than Logan wanted, and 1 day shorter than Dr. Kaur believed was medically defensible. She was a compact, no-nonsense woman who had clearly spent her career dealing with patients who thought their own assessment of their condition was more reliable than hers, and she had developed a specific look for those patients. Not unkind, but absolutely unmovable, that she deployed on Logan 3 times in the first 24 hours before he stopped arguing and accepted that the shoulder was not a thing he was going to walk off. The surgery took 2.5 hours. A torn labrum, 2 compromised structures in the rotator cuff, and what the orthopedic surgeon described with professional understatement as significant accumulated wear, suggesting the joint had been through considerable stress over a long period of time. Logan did not tell him how long or what kind. The surgeon didn't ask, which Logan appreciated. The ribs were 2 cracked and 1 fully fractured, which Dr. Kaur explained required enforced stillness in a way that made Logan want to get up and leave, which she anticipated, which was why she'd already had the conversation with Gerald the nurse, who appeared to have been selected for this particular patient assignment based on his ability to be cheerful and immovable simultaneously. The arm wound, 22 stitches, a course of antibiotics, dressing changes every morning, turned out to be the least complicated thing, which, given how much it had bled, seemed unjust. He had a lot of time to lie in the hospital bed and look at the ceiling. I used some of it to think through operational details that still needed closing, the cross-organization's remaining financial threads, the 2 men from the dock team he hadn't fully accounted for, the question of the building's technical systems, and what else might be compromised that Graves hadn't admitted to. He used some of it to not think, which he was worse at, but which the medications helped with in a way he found both useful and slightly unsettling. He used some of it to think about Rachel. He did this less than he used to. The raw, constant preoccupation of the first year after her death had dulled over time into something more manageable, more like a permanent weather condition than an acute injury. But lying still in a hospital bed with his arm in a sling and his ribs complaining with every breath, there was something about the specific vulnerability of the situation that brought her back with a clarity he didn't always have. Not her death. He'd spent enough time with that. Her. The way she used to sit on the kitchen counter when they were talking about something important, legs dangling, because she said standing felt too formal and sitting at the table felt too official, and the counter was the right height for a real conversation. The way she'd looked at him sometimes like she was reading something he hadn't said out loud, and deciding whether to translate it back to him or let him figure it out himself. He thought about what she would have made of the last 3 weeks. He thought she'd have had a lot to say. He thought he'd have been glad to hear it. On the second day, Emma arrived. What? Greta Solano drove her, and Emma came through the hospital room door with her backpack on and her sketchbook under her arm, and the expression of a 7-year-old who has been reassured by multiple adults that everything was fine and has decided to conduct her own assessment. She looked at the sling. She looked at the stitched arm. She looked at the bruising on his jaw and cheekbone, which had developed fully overnight into something that Logan, catching it in the bathroom mirror that morning, had found impressively terrible. She came around to the chair beside his bed and sat down and opened her sketchbook. He knew this pattern. She was processing something, and drawing was how she did it, the pencil moving while her mind worked on whatever she wasn't ready to say yet. He let her draw. The room was quiet except for the corridor sounds beyond the door and the low electronic hum of the monitoring equipment. After about 8 minutes, she said, without looking up, "Were you protecting someone?" "Yes," he said. "Ms. Victoria?" He paused. "How do you know about her?" "Ms. Greta showed me the news on her tablet." Emma turned a page, still not looking up. It said a janitor stopped bad guys from hurting people in a building. It didn't say your name, but Ms. Greta said she thought it was probably you because of your job. She paused. "And because she said you have quiet eyes. She says people with quiet eyes have usually seen a lot." Logan looked at his daughter. "Ms. Greta said that." "She's very perceptive," Emma said, with the gravity of someone quoting a reliable source. She glanced up. "Were you in the Army?" "Navy." She nodded, turning this over. "Were you good at it?" He thought about the honest answer, which was complicated. and gave her the version that was true without being more than she needed right now. I was good at the parts that kept people alive. I wasn't always as good at the parts that came after. She seemed to understand that. Or she accepted it for now, filed it, and would return to it when she had more context, which was how her mind worked, and which was, he'd come to understand, actually a sophisticated way to handle complexity. She went back to drawing. He looked at the ceiling. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. I'm glad you're okay." A beat. "Even with the sling." "Me too, Em," he said. "Me too." She held up the sketchbook to show him what she'd been drawing. It was a horse, but with wings. A new development in her equine taxonomy, standing on something that might have been a cloud or might have been a rooftop. He looked at it for a moment. "That's good," he said. "I'm trying something new," she said, and went back to drawing with the concentrated seriousness of someone engaged in important work. He stayed looking at the ceiling. The room was warm. His daughter was 3 feet away. Outside, the city was being the city, indifferent and continuous and full of people living their specific lives. And he was, for the moment, not required to be anything other than a man in a hospital bed with a daughter in a chair beside him. He thought, more than enough. The aftermath came in waves, the way it always does. Not a clean resolution, but a series of them, each one requiring something different, each one arriving before the previous one had fully closed. The police first. Detective Reyes came on day 3 with a partner and a recorder, and the careful manner of someone who had been extensively briefed and was still working through what she'd been told. She had questions about the roof, about Cross and Rourke, and the men in the building, about the financial operation details Logan had extracted before Marcus arrived. She was thorough and professional and didn't press where he signaled he wouldn't go, which he respected. At the end, she clicked off the recorder and looked at him with that expression she'd had the first night in the lobby. Professional assessment over something more human underneath it. "You told me Navy, administrative," she said, "the first night." "I remember." "I want you to know I've thought about that description several times since." The corner of her mouth moved very slightly. "We're going to call it a creative interpretation." "I appreciate that," Logan said. "The FBI," she said, with the tone of someone acknowledging a larger organizational reality they have complicated feelings about, "is extremely satisfied with the information you provided. That tends to smooth certain things over." "I'd imagine." "The 11 men who were hospitalized are going to create some legal conversation." "They entered the building armed and with intent to harm civilians," Logan said. "I responded to what the situation required." Reyes looked at him for another moment. Then she stood and offered her hand. He shook it with his right, the functional one. "Take care of that shoulder," she said. "Working on it," he said. She left. He lay back and thought about the specific quality of conversations that were, in the end, about whether a person was going to be held accountable for surviving something, and how they usually resolved when the alternative was explaining to a federal agency why the thing they'd been failing to close for 9 years had been closed by a janitor on a rooftop. The FBI came the following week, after he was home. 2 agents, not the detectives he'd seen at the building, but Federal Organized Crime Division, with the particular professional calm of people who operated at a scale where individual urgency had been trained out of them. They sat across from him at the new kitchen table. He and Emma had already moved, a larger apartment 6 blocks from her school, 2nd floor, good windows. A kitchen that didn't require the occupant to stand sideways to open the refrigerator, and they confirmed what Reyes had told him. The financial mechanisms Cross had built into Blackstone's board structure were being systematically dismantled. 3 shell entities already frozen. The pipeline that had funneled information through Carter Wells had been traced to its origin and documented. Damian Cross had been transferred to federal custody and was facing charges across 6 jurisdictions. His organization, without him and without Rourke, and without the infrastructure that had taken 2 decades to construct, was already collapsing in sections, each section's fall destabilizing the next, the way these structures always went when the foundation was pulled. "The Clearwater operation file," one of the agents said. "You're aware it's still classified." "I'm aware." "It will remain classified, but there are people who know what it contained and what you did, and they want that acknowledged even if it can't be said publicly." Logan looked at them. "Tell them I appreciate it." There was a pause. The second agent said, There's also a formal offer on the table. Reinstatement of rank, restoration of your service record, with commendation attached. There are positions. I have a position, Logan said. The agent nodded slowly. We expected that answer. I know, Logan said. I figured you'd want to make the offer anyway. We did, the agent said, on behalf of people who felt it was owed. They shook hands and left. Logan sat at the kitchen table after they'd gone and thought about what it meant to be owed something for a long time and then have the debt acknowledged and decline the payment, and whether that was nobility or just stubbornness, and concluded it was probably some combination of both, with a healthy measure of knowing what you actually wanted, which was underrated as a life skill. Emma came home from school 40 minutes later with a drawing of a fish she'd done during art class. She informed him that she had decided on a name for the hypothetical fish, which meant she considered the matter settled, and that the name was Admiral. We don't have a fish yet, Logan said. We will, Emma said, with complete serenity, and went to put her backpack away. The government came in the fourth week, 2 men in good suits with federal credentials that Logan examined carefully before letting them sit down. They made their case with practiced ease: rank reinstatement, record restoration, positions available, the argument that his particular skill set was being, as one of them put it, underutilized. Logan listened to all of it. He'd known this was coming since the discharge paperwork. He'd been preparing his answer since somewhere around the 3rd day in the hospital, lying in the particular quiet of 2 a.m., when the corridor outside had gone still and the city was as close to asleep as it ever got, and he'd had nothing to do but think honestly about what he wanted. What he wanted was not complicated, which was itself something he'd had to accept. He'd spent so long in a life organized around complexity and threat assessment and the management of terrible possibilities that the simplicity of what he actually wanted had taken him a while to trust. He told them no. He told them why, briefly. Emma, the job, the city, the fact that he'd made a commitment. The first man seemed to genuinely weigh this rather than treating it as an obstacle. We expected that answer, he said. We wanted to offer it anyway. I know, Logan said. That's why I listened to the whole thing. They shook hands. They left. Logan sat in the conference room at Blackstone alone for a few minutes after, feeling the solid closing sound of a decision that was finished being made. Not relief exactly. More like the specific quiet of something that had been open for a long time finally settling shut. He'd been 22 years old in that compound in 2004. He'd been a man who believed in what he was doing with his whole body and the better part of his soul, who had gone into dark places because someone had to, and he was someone who could. He didn't regret any of it, not the service, not the extraction, not the decision he'd made when Rachel died to take Emma and disappear into a small, quiet life that was built around keeping one specific person safe. What he understood now was that the decision had been right for that moment and had quietly become wrong over time, the way decisions do when the circumstances that made them correct have changed, but the decision hasn't noticed yet. He'd been protecting Emma from the world by keeping her away from it, which wasn't the same as raising her in it. He'd been surviving instead of living, and he'd gotten good enough at surviving that he'd almost stopped noticing the difference. The roof had changed that, not because of what he'd done up there, but because of what had been true before it. The look on Emma's face when she said, "You said you'd be fine." The photograph of her outside her school taken from a long-lens camera by someone who considered her a tool. The realization that the small, quiet life had not, in the end, kept anyone small or quiet or safe. You couldn't make the world safe by making your life smaller. You could only make your life smaller. Victoria came to the hospital on the last afternoon, an hour before Dr. Kaur signed the discharge paperwork. She came alone, her preference, Logan had learned, when a conversation was going to be real, in dark jeans and a plain jacket, her hair down. She sat in Emma's chair and looked at the sling and didn't say anything about it, which he appreciated. The company is intact, she said. The financial mechanisms are being unwound. It's going to take months with the lawyers and it's not going to be simple, but it's survivable. She paused. Cross's inside man in the technical systems, Graves, was picked up yesterday. Carter Wells has been formally charged. The board has been informed there was a security incident that has been resolved, and I've scheduled a full structural review for next month. Good, Logan said. Marcus says the building's security architecture needs a complete rebuild from the ground up. She looked at him steadily. He says he'd like to do it with someone who actually knows what they're doing. That's the most generous thing Marcus has ever said about me. He said it while looking at the ceiling and rubbing the back of his neck, but the content was accurate. Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile. I have a proposal. He mentioned you might. Chief of Security, full authority over the structure, the personnel, all of it. Salary that reflects the actual nature of the position rather than the position it was replacing. She said it directly, without the corporate packaging. Emma gets stability. A school she doesn't have to leave. A city. Logan looked at his hands. The left one, bandaged and slightly swollen, rested on the blanket. The right one was just his hand. The mop callus, the old knuckle scarring, the plain working hand of a man who had carried a lot of weight across a lot of years in a lot of different configurations. 7 years, he said. 4 cities, 3 schools for Emma. He paused. She doesn't complain. She's never complained once about any of it, which I've told myself means she's adaptable, but what it actually means is she learned early that complaining didn't change anything, and that's not a thing I wanted to teach her. No, Victoria said quietly. It isn't. I've been protecting her by keeping everything small, he said, and small stopped working. I think it stopped working a while ago, and I didn't let myself see it. He looked at her. Yes. Yes? Yes to the position, with conditions. She didn't reach for a pen or a notepad. She just looked at him and waited, which was the right response. Emma comes first. Whatever the job requires, if it conflicts with what Emma needs, Emma wins. Every time, no discussion. Agreed. I run the security structure my way. Marcus reports to me and we work as partners, not around each other. Marcus accepts that or he finds another employer, Victoria said. He'll accept it. And I'm not a story. I'm not a symbol. I'm not a face for a corporate communications piece. I'm not something that gets packaged for press. What happened stays internal. I wouldn't have it any other way, she said. Frankly, what happened is the last thing I'd want in a press piece. I'd spend 6 months explaining it to the board. One more thing, Logan said. Name it. The break room on the first floor, the fluorescent light that buzzes. She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, genuinely, briefly, the kind of laugh that surprised the person doing it, that came from somewhere real rather than from social management. It changed her face significantly. He noticed it and filed it somewhere that wasn't quite professional category. Monday, she said. I'll have it done Monday. I was discharged that afternoon. He collected Emma from Greta Solano's apartment, thanked Greta in the specific plain way she preferred over elaborate demonstrations of gratitude, and met Professor the cat, who was gray and wholly indifferent to new arrivals, and sat on the couch regarding Logan with the philosophical calm of a creature that had made peace with the world's disorder long ago. Emma said goodbye to Professor with the seriousness of a formal parting. They went to the new apartment. It was larger than Carver Street, which wasn't a high bar. 2 good bedrooms, a kitchen without spatial negotiations, windows on the east side that got morning light. Emma had already claimed her room in the single afternoon she'd spent there before the hospital and had arranged her sketchbooks on the windowsill in an order that made sense to her. Logan made dinner, spaghetti with the jarred sauce Emma specifically preferred over homemade, which she found too tomatoey in a way he had never fully understood but had stopped questioning. They sat at the kitchen table that didn't wobble. Emma told him about Greta's apartment and Professor and the homework she'd completed and a conversation she'd had with her new classmate about the relative merits of different colored pencil brands, which was apparently a topic of some depth. After dinner, he told her they weren't moving again. She put her fork down. She looked at him with full attention, the look that was Rachel's, the one that took everything in and gave nothing away while it was still deciding. We're staying, she said. We're staying. This city, this apartment, your school, this is where we live. She was quiet for a moment, not a short quiet, a real one, the kind that meant she was working through the actual weight of what he'd said rather than just the surface. Because of what happened? She asked. Because it was time, he said. What happened just made it clear. She picked up her fork. She twirled some spaghetti with the focused application of someone who had a system for it. She seemed to be finishing an internal conversation. Then, can I get a cat? Logan looked at her. No. A small one. No. What if it was a very calm cat, like Professor? Professor is calm because Professor is very old and has stopped caring about things. A young cat is not calm. She considered this seriously. What about a fish? A fish, Logan said, is a possibility. She nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully negotiated to her actual target. She went back to her spaghetti. He looked at her. 7 years old, dark hair, her mother's eyes, her mother's way of making a point without making a production of it, and felt something in his chest that was not grief exactly, though it was adjacent to grief. It was the feeling of understanding something fully that you'd understood incompletely before. The feeling of being entirely in the right place. Outside, the city did its city things. A siren several blocks away fading, the particular sound of evening traffic, the building's heating system ticking on against the cooling temperature. All of it completely ordinary, and the ordinary of it was not a diminishment but a gift. The specific gift of a life that had space in it for small things like jarred spaghetti sauce and the negotiating tactics of a 7-year-old and a fish named Admiral that didn't exist yet. He'd spent 7 years treating ordinary as something to get through between threats. He was beginning to understand that ordinary was the point. The weeks that followed were not simple, because nothing after something like that is simple, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. There were lawyers and depositions and federal processes that moved at their own geological pace. There were security consultants from 3 firms who spent 4 days at Blackstone assessing everything Marcus and Logan had built, and produced a report that Marcus shared with Logan with the specific expression of a man who has decided to be gracious in victory. There were board meetings that Victoria navigated with the combination of transparency and strategic information management that Logan was coming to understand was one of her actual gifts, telling people enough of the truth to retain their trust, while not telling them so much that they panicked and made everything worse. Marcus Webb was a different kind of complicated. He was a man who had built his professional identity around being the most competent person in his domain, and adjusting to a structure where someone else held the authority he'd previously held required the kind of internal reorganization that didn't happen cleanly or quickly. He and Logan had 3 conversations in the first 2 weeks that were in the specific vocabulary of men who don't talk about things directly. Arguments, about protocols, about personnel decisions, about the rebuild of the building's camera system. After the 3rd one, Logan said, "Marcus, I'm not here to make you look bad or take what you've built and throw it out. You know this building and you know these people, and that's not nothing. What I know is threat architecture and operational response. Those are different things, and they fit together." He paused. "If you want to keep fighting about who's right, we'll keep fighting and the building will be less safe for it. Or we can figure out how to actually work together and do something that neither of us could do alone." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The camera rebuild. Your specs for the northeast stairwell are more conservative than what the manufacturer recommends. The manufacturer hasn't been inside that stairwell at midnight trying to figure out what's in the blind angle," Logan said. "I have." Marcus looked at the specs for another moment. Then he picked up a pen and made a small notation. "We'll go with your coverage arc," he said, "but I want redundant feeds on the dock approach." "Agreed," Logan said. It wasn't a resolution so much as a beginning of a working arrangement, which was what a working arrangement was. Not the end of friction, but the development of friction that produced something useful. They were, in time, going to be effective together. Logan was relatively certain of this. Marcus was professional enough that his competence would override his ego when it came to the actual work, which was all Logan required. Chen, Briggs, and Ortega presented different versions of the same adjustment. They'd been through something with Logan that had no institutional category. Not quite combat, not quite private security, something with the texture of both, and the complete absence of any preparation for either. It changed how they looked at him, and it changed how they looked at themselves. And that second change was the more significant one. Ortega, who had locked himself in the server room on the 22nd floor and held it for 45 minutes with a steel door and a level of sheer determined stubbornness that Logan credited with saving the building's communications, had submitted a formal request to be transferred to the security team's operational division. Logan approved it before it reached his desk officially. Briggs told him about it the following Monday. "Ortega's been different since that night," Briggs said. "More settled. Like he figured something out about himself." "He did," Logan said. "He found out he doesn't freeze." Briggs nodded slowly. That's a useful thing to know about yourself. One of the most useful. Carter Wells was charged and processed through a legal system that moved, in this instance, with more speed than its reputation suggested, partly because the federal case was airtight, and partly because Wells, once he understood the scale of what he'd been part of, entered a cooperation agreement that allowed his attorneys to make a case for reduced sentencing in exchange for comprehensive testimony. Graves, the technical contact inside the building's systems, did not cooperate and face the full weight of what he'd done, which was substantial. Damian Cross's legal situation was a different order of magnitude. 6 jurisdictions, decades of accumulated organizational liability, the financial trail that Logan had extracted on the roof, and that the FBI's forensic accounting teams had spent weeks converting into charges that covered everything from conspiracy to wire fraud to complicity in a range of operations that Logan didn't read about in detail because reading about it in detail was not something he needed. Rourke cooperated partially, enough to provide operational details that corroborated what Logan had given the FBI, not enough to eliminate his own criminal exposure. He got 12 years. His attorney got him the number by arguing, not inaccurately, that Rourke had been following the instructions of a man who had been building toward this for 20 years and whose organization Rourke had joined before its full nature was apparent, which was true in a technical sense and misleading in every sense that mattered. Logan didn't attend any of the proceedings. He had no interest in the legal machinery of it. What he needed to know was that Cross's organization was dismantled and that the financial operations targeting Blackstone were unwound. And both of those things happened with sufficient thoroughness that Victoria's legal team declared the company clean before the end of the 4th month. He told Emma, the night he read the final summary from Victoria's attorney, that some bad people who had been causing trouble had been dealt with. Emma looked up from Admiral's tank. They'd gotten the fish 3 weeks after moving in, a betta, blue-red, housed in a small tank on Emma's desk, and said, "The same ones from before?" "The same ones," he said. "Good," she said, with a 7-year-old's clean finality, and went back to watching the fish. Admiral was, it turned out, a fish of considerable personality. Emma had been observing and documenting his behavioral patterns in a small notebook she'd repurposed for this, and she had developed several theories about his preferences, moods, and what she described as his general worldview. Logan had read 2 pages of this notebook when Emma offered it to him and had found it unexpectedly compelling, which said something about either Emma's observational skills or the fish. He wasn't sure which. Victoria came to the apartment for the first time in the 2nd month, and it was, technically, for a practical reason. A contract document needing his signature that she chose to bring personally rather than courier, which both of them understood was not the actual reason, but which provided a suitable framework for the visit. She looked at the apartment in the way people look at spaces they're trying to understand in relation to the person who inhabits them, and she said almost nothing about what she observed, which Logan found he appreciated. Emma was home. She came out of her room when she heard the door, looked at Victoria with her standard assessment process, and said, "You're Ms. Victoria." "I am," Victoria said. "You're Emma." "Yes." Emma looked at her for another moment. "Dad says you're the person he works for now." "That's mostly right," Victoria said. "Is it good work?" Victoria glanced at Logan, who maintained a perfectly neutral expression. "I think so," she said. "Your dad is very good at it." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her room but left the door open, which Logan recognized as her way of staying involved in the situation without committing to direct participation. Victoria stayed for an hour. They went through the contract, which took 12 minutes. The remaining 48 minutes were a conversation about the company, about the board's ongoing questions, about Marcus's gradual adjustment and Chen's promotion, and the rebuilt security infrastructure that was, by Logan's assessment, now actually adequate for the building it was protecting. It was a professional conversation, and also not entirely a professional conversation, in the way that conversations between 2 people who have been through something significant together are not entirely about the surface topic. At one point, Victoria said, "I went back to therapy, after everything. I'd stopped going 3 years ago because I thought I'd handled it." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said things she'd decided to say directly rather than manage. "It turns out I'd handled it about 70% of the way and then built a company on top of the remaining 30. "That's a common approach," Logan said. "Is it yours?" He thought about it honestly. More or less, mine was a daughter instead of a company. Same basic architecture. She looked at him. Are you going to do something about the remaining 30%? I've started, he said. It's slow. Therapy is slow, she agreed. I don't mean therapy. I mean, he paused, looking for the right language. I mean letting things be what they are instead of what they need to be for me to function around them. She was quiet for a moment. That's harder than therapy. Yeah, he said, but I think it's the part that actually does something. Emma appeared in the doorway then, having concluded that the conversation had gone on long enough without her participation. She was carrying Admiral's notebook, and she wanted to tell Victoria her current theories about the fish's preference for morning versus afternoon light, and Victoria, to her considerable credit, received this information with genuine interest and asked 2 follow-up questions that made Emma look at her with the expression she reserved for people who passed an invisible standard she hadn't publicized. When Victoria left, Emma said, "She's okay." High praise, Logan said. I don't give it out easily, Emma said, which was true. The Saturday that stayed with Logan, not the most dramatic, not the one with the highest stakes, just the one that sat in his memory with a particular clarity, was 6 months after the roof. Victoria came over in the late afternoon with a bag that contained, it turned out, the components for homemade pizza. She'd apparently been told by someone, Emma, Logan suspected, on the basis of a conversation he'd been adjacent to, that pizza was a food that mattered in this household, and she had taken this information and done something practical with it. They made pizza at the kitchen table, the 3 of them. Emma directed the process with absolute authority on the subject of cheese quantity and the geographic distribution of toppings, and Logan handled the dough because it turned out Victoria had opinions about sauce, but had never worked with raw dough and was willing to admit this, which he found unexpectedly charming. There was flour on the counter and on Emma's sleeve, and at one point briefly on Victoria's jacket, which she looked at and then decided not to address. It was loud and slightly chaotic, and the pizza came out slightly uneven and very good. After dinner, they cleaned up. Emma washed, Logan dried, Victoria put things away in approximately the right places, and asked when she was wrong. And Emma showed Victoria Admiral's tank and the behavioral notebook and explained her current theory about why betta fish orient themselves toward their owner's face, which had something to do with pattern recognition and something to do with what Emma called fish feelings, which was a category she'd invented and which her description made entirely coherent. Victoria asked the right questions. Not performed questions, not adult indulging a child questions, but actual interest in what Emma was saying. Logan, watching from the kitchen doorway, noticed this in the specific way you notice something that matters. At some point, Emma looked up from the tank and said, conversationally, "Are you and my dad going to be friends for a long time?" Victoria glanced over at Logan. He kept his expression completely neutral and offered no assistance whatsoever. "I think so," Victoria said. "I'd like to be." Emma considered this, looking at the fish. "He's hard to be friends with at first," she said, "but it gets easier." "I've noticed that," Victoria said. "He makes good pasta," Emma said. "That's a positive sign. Ms. Greta says you can tell a lot about a person by what they feed you." "Ms. Greta," Logan said from the doorway, "has a lot of opinions." "She's usually right, though," Emma said, which was, objectively, true. Later, after Emma was in bed and Victoria had said goodnight, and Logan had walked her to the door, Victoria stopped in the doorway for a moment. "I've been thinking about something you said," she said, "about protection and presence not being the same thing." He'd said it to Marcus, actually, in a slightly different form, but he knew what she meant. "Yeah, I think I've been doing the same thing," she said, "with the company. Building walls and calling it strength." She paused. "I'm trying to do it differently." "How's that going?" "Slow," she said. "Same as yours." "That's the right pace," Logan said. She looked at him for a moment. There was something in her expression that he'd been seeing more of in recent months. Not the managed composure of her professional self, not the stripped-back steadiness of crisis, but something more ordinary and harder to name, the expression of a person who was still figuring out how to be in a life that had changed significantly and was doing that figuring out in real time with imperfect information and occasional uncertainty. He knew what that looked like. He saw it in the mirror most mornings. "Good night, Logan," she said. "Good night," he said. She left. He locked the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the apartment settle around him. The tick of Admiral's filter in Emma's room, the building's heating system, the distant ordinary sounds of a city being a city. There's a thing you learn, if you're paying attention, about the shape of a life. It doesn't look like what you planned. It rarely looks like what you survived. It looks like what you chose when you stopped letting the worst things that happened to you make all your decisions. Logan Hayes had let the worst thing, Rachel, the empty side of a bed, the infant daughter he didn't know how to raise alone, make his decisions for 7 years. He'd called it protection, and it had been, partly, but it had also been fear. And fear is a reasonable response to loss, but it's a terrible architect. He'd spent the last 6 months building something different, not the absence of caution. He was always going to be the man who noted exits and listened for wrong sounds. Some things were too structural to change, but caution in service of living rather than caution instead of it. Emma had a fish and a school she liked, and a new friend whose name Logan had heard approximately 40 times in the past 2 weeks. She had a room with morning light and a windowsill of sketchbooks, and a behavioral science project about a betta-fish that her teacher had asked her to present to the class, which she'd done with the focused seriousness she brought to everything that mattered to her. She was, as far as Logan could tell, happy. Not in the simplified way of a child who doesn't know what there is to be unhappy about, but in the real way. The way that includes having hard days and missing things and finding the world sometimes confusing and still basically okay with being in it. He took most of the credit for that, and then he thought about it more honestly and gave a significant portion of it to Emma herself, who had taken a childhood that wasn't easy and made something workable out of it with a resourcefulness that was entirely her own. He thought about Rachel. He did this every day, in varying degrees, sometimes just a passing awareness, sometimes something fuller that required him to sit with it for a moment before moving on. He'd stopped thinking of it as a wound that wouldn't close and started thinking of it as a room in the house of himself that he could go into and come back out of, which was a different relationship with the same grief. Rachel would have liked Emma's fish. She would have had a name suggestion that was better than Admiral, and Emma would have argued for Admiral anyway, and they'd have reached a compromise that somehow incorporated both ideas. He could see it clearly. Rachel on the floor of Emma's room at tank level, looking at the fish with the absorbed interest she brought to anything Emma cared about, asking questions until she understood not just the fish, but why the fish mattered. He missed her with a completeness that had not diminished, exactly, but had become less like falling and more like weight. Present, real, something you carried rather than something that carried you. He went to check on Emma. She was asleep, one arm out from under the blanket, the Admiral notebook on the nightstand. The fish moved in its tank, a slow turn, the fins catching the tank's small light. Logan stood in the doorway for a moment. His shoulder was mostly healed. The surgeon had used the word excellent at the last follow-up, with the particular satisfaction of a craftsman whose work was performing correctly. His ribs no longer announced themselves with every deep breath. The arm was clean, the scar already settling into something unremarkable. He was, more or less, intact. He pulled Emma's door partway closed and went to the kitchen and made tea, a habit he'd picked up somewhere in the last 6 months without noticing, the same way you pick up a lot of things when you're paying more attention to what you're doing. He stood at the window with the cup and looked at the city. He'd asked for quiet once. He'd asked for small and invisible and safe. He'd gotten it for 7 years, and it had been the right thing for that time, and then it hadn't been anymore, and the world had made that clear in the specific forceful way that the world makes things clear when you've been avoiding them too long. What he had now was not quiet in the old sense. It was louder, more complicated, more people and more stakes and more surface area for things to go wrong. His job required things that the janitor work hadn't, and gave him things the janitor work couldn't, and some days he was still adjusting to the difference. But the city outside the window was the same city it had always been. Indifferent and continuous and full of people carrying their specific weights through their specific lives, doing what they could with what they had, which was all anyone actually did. The tea was warm in his hands. The apartment was quiet in the ways that mattered. Logan Hayes stood at his kitchen window on an ordinary night in a life that was not what he'd planned and not what he'd survived and exactly what he'd chosen, and he let it be what it was. That was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. That was everything.